Hello, everyone. My name is Taylin Washington Harmon. I am the clinical trials editor here at blackdoctor.org, and I'm here to wish you all a very happy Clinical Trials Day, which is why we're hosting this amazing summit full of amazing folks who are here to educate you on what exactly a clinical trial is, why they matter, what Black people can do to ensure that we are accurately represented in clinical trials, and how we can better establish better health for our future by participating. So, Ricky, thank you for being here
Hey,
today.
thanks for having me. This is one of my favorite days of the year. I talk about clinical trials every day of the year, but it's great to put a special, some special time around it. And, Taylor, we've done a lot of talking to Black breast cancer patients and survivors about clinical trials. And we learned in our research that most people don't participate, at least Black women, because their doctor never asked them, right?
That's
And
very
so
true.
it's so important for us to have this conversation and explain to people that everybody can ask for a clinical trial. It's not a last resort. In cancer and oncology, there's no sugar pill, and to really understand how it works. And I ask people all the time, when you if you were to call your mama or your auntie or your grandma, your uncle, or somebody in your family and ask how a clinical trial works, no one will be able to tell you. They don't understand. People just don't know. We don't talk about it. And so today we are going to talk about it, and people are going to walk away feeling informed and educated and motivated and say, wait, sign me up. What can I do right now? I've done about 7 clinical trials, only one for medication for that, and what saved my life. I mean, basically, if I hadn't done a clinical trial, I'd be dead. So this is my God job. And I want everybody to participate in trials because we just don't have enough science for Black people, for Black bodies. We don't have enough science.
Absolutely.
We now are seeing across disease, and we'll talk about every disease today, a lot of Black diseases today. We'll see that, it's different for us. The
It
side
really is.
effects are different, the things are different. And so let's bring it. We got some great people, all of our friends and new friends, old friends, and we're so happy to have everybody here to talk today.
Yeah, so here I am to introduce our esteemed guest for our very first segment, Understanding the Gap, Why Clinical Trials Matter. Our first guest is Amanda Bishop, who is the Associate Director in Diversity, Inclusion, and Clinical Trials and the Diversity Program Lead at Merck. Amanda serves as the primary lead developing and overseeing the operational strategy, planning, and evaluation of patient diversity for breast and gynecological cancers, as well as our other guest, Dr. Angela James, the founder and CEO of Diversity Health Networks, a company committed to transforming the landscape of clinical research by ensuring that trials are inclusive and representative of diverse populations, and Keontae Key, who is the cultural marketing lead at GCI Health. She sits at the intersection of data, digital and health equity, and leads cultural marketing at GCI, where she's created the identity experience methodology as well as authored a study on Black women's perceptions of clinical trials. So happy to have you all here, ladies.
So, what a
Glad to
great
be
group
here.
of
Yeah,
Black women. I love this so much.
exactly. Yes,
Great, great.
yes.
So you guys, I always like to start, my Dr. Lynn show with what's your why? Why do you do this work? And why do you think, we should be doing this work about clinical trials? Keontae, you want to go first?
Think I'm passionate about this work as a Black woman, but specifically 5 years ago, I helped my mother take care of my grandmother who was living with end stage kidney disease.
Mm.
And I asked her one day, sort of, have you ever been a part of a clinical trial? She said no. My mother also said no. And I've never been a part of a clinical trial. So I was thinking about, 3 generations of Black women in this country, and none of us have ever been a part of a clinical trial. And it is necessary for us to be a part of the clinical trial, not only because we can improve our health outcomes, but we can make science better. So that's why I like to do this work.
Awesome, awesome. How about you, Amanda?
Well, my why, actually, when you look at me, you might say, well, it's because she's a Black person, she's a female, both fall in this diversity metric, but really it has to do with uh, growing up in a rural area. And so my why has everything to do with access. And I wanted to make sure that small towns like the one where I grew up would have access to highly skilled professionals and some of the latest medicines as well. And so that's what really propelled me into going into the sciences, even as a child, to really bring back uh, medicine, highly skilled professionals to small towns like mine. So diversity and inclusion in clinical trials for me has everything to do with providing access to all populations and making sure not just urban areas, but rural areas and all the different populations in between, no matter where you live or what you look like, that you have access to highly skilled medications and treatments.
That's great. And we really know that, and people don't know that in a clinical trial, you're getting a better quality of care, and I think that's one of the benefits of it. And frankly, too, if you don't have insurance, it's most usually paid for, right, by the pharma company that's doing the trial. But you're getting more prodding, more scans, more poking, more people nurturing over you and taking care of you. So you really are getting an amazing quality of care. So having access to that quality is so great. So great.
Absolutely.
Thank you. Angela.
So my why is twofold, really. Personally, I've been involved with the care of various relatives. And what really hit home was the caring for a very close cousin who was diagnosed with triple negative breast cancer during the pandemic, where all things were shut down. And we were very blessed because we had the expertise within our own family to pull together a family care team to manage her care with looking at clinical trials, bringing that information into the conversations with the physicians, not just waiting for someone to tell us what to do or, how to handle her treatment, the quality of life changes, everything changes with these types of diagnoses. And so it really is what you said, your God job. And I felt God really moved me to say, we need this, because if we were there advocating and we were met with challenges, I mean, it wasn't easy. How difficult is it for others who don't have those people in their lives, right? And it bothers me. It still bothers me because I know that everyone needs an advocate, and be taught how to self-advocate. So that really has been my passion, and what is these are the fruit of my labor.
That's great. And, I love that. I think we all have to, thank God your family had you to do this, especially during COVID when, we know so many people didn't go get treatment or get mammograms and stuff. And, that's when we started The Doctor Is In, for that reason, because we felt like people were afraid to go out and were afraid to foray out of their house to get the medical treatment they needed. And so, the more we can talk about, the better. So it's all important. So why do you guys think that we need more representation? I know for breast cancer, I think the latest numbers are Black women have a 3% participation rate in clinical trials. That's nothing. That's zero. So, I think we have a good understanding of why, but I mean, what do you guys think we should be doing? What can we do to change that game? And I can talk about a little bit what we're doing, but, we all should be doing this work,
Well, I'll just start.
I'm not letting you talk.
Amanda, your thoughts?
Go ahead.
Yes, so what I'll say is let's talk about clinical trials. So when we talk about clinical trials, what we're really talking about is research, right? Clinical trials are research studies designed to learn more about how our bodies respond to medicines that are in development. So that's what helps us to determine whether the investigation of medications are safe and whether those medications are effective. So it's very important that we have diverse representation in the trials, because that's how we ensure that the data generated from the clinical trials reflects the diversity of the people. And so the clinical trials, that's what provides that data, the data that's needed to assess the benefits, but not just the benefits, but also the risk of the medication that's being studied. So now we know that different people have different reactions to the same treatment. And that can be based on their age, their gender, their weight, or other factors, including their race and ethnicity. So for that reason, it's important that we have participation in clinical trials that represent the people who are most likely to actually get the disease. So whoever is most likely to get the health condition, they're going to be the people who need the treatment that their trial is testing. And as you pointed out earlier, the Black population is among those that have historically had lower representation. Mostly, I would say clinical trial participants have been predominantly white males.
Mhm.
And although the US Census, at least the census information currently indicates that the Black population is around approaching 14%, but that's not what you see in the clinical trials. We see numbers that are much lower than that. And so I know others would want to build on it, so I will leave it there. But that's why it's very important for us to really increase the representation that we see in the clinical trials for Black participants.
Yeah, and I think it should be even different from population, Amanda.
Mhm.
I think it should be like commensurate with the burden of disease.
Absolutely.
So when I look at something like triple negative breast cancer that Black women get at 3 times the rate of white women,
Mhm.
you know, I'm not trying to do that math, but that's how it should, the representation should be. Do you know what I mean? It should be, yeah.
It really should be. And that's exactly why when we create our diversity action plans, what we do is we base it on, well, who's getting the burden of disease? Who actually do we see that has that health condition? And not just who's getting it, but who's dying from it. Because sometimes there can be someone that actually, maybe there's a population that's really, they're getting it more. However, they may be living with it versus others. You mentioned breast cancer.
Right.
Others can be dying from it. So mortality could be higher. So it's not just who's actually getting the burden of, who actually has the burden of disease, who actually is getting it more, but also who's dying from it more as well.
Right.
That's a really great point you made, Amanda. Dr. James, what are your thoughts?
So I've also been a drug development expert for over 20 years in the pharma and biotech industry. And so I've seen it from both sides, both the personal and the professional. When I speak from the professional side, what we really need are clinical trials that are representative of these real world patient populations. So the burden of disease, that's very important. Who is experiencing the disease? Are our clinical trials reflecting that population in terms of the patient populations that we enroll? And if not, how can we generalize the data? How can we say these data that we're collecting, that we're using to really have these drugs approved, can be extrapolated or it can be generalized to patient populations that we haven't even studied? That scientifically, that's not sound. It's not robust. And so what happens is a clinical trial has a small number of patients. So we tried, like I'll go into breast cancer. You know, it's not uncommon for a breast cancer trial to have a few hundred to a few thousand patients in their pivotal trials. And maybe across the drug, the development of the course of the drug, maybe another few thousand. But we want to bring this out to millions of patients, right? We're talking about using this drug in millions of patients. You do not want to get into a large patient population and start seeing safety issues because we didn't have the right data to really evaluate that, or that the drug is not as effective in some patient populations. And that is, there are biological differences between, demographically, by gender as well, right? So mind you, not only are about 80% of trial participants white males, the female population is lower in most clinical trials. So we're using drugs for women, we're using drugs for other populations that aren't being studied in the clinical trials. And that, as a scientist, is very difficult to say. I can predict what would happen based on the data that I have. So it's really, really important to have representation. And how do we do that, right? I think, Ricky, when you talked about how do we do this work, we talk about information, empowering, how to ask the right questions, making sure you're asking those questions, right? Making sure you're in a shared system when it comes to your health care,
Mm.
Right.
the decision-making system. Yeah.
Yeah. And you know what?
Yeah,
I
and
want to
this
break it down a little bit for people, because I always say, talk to me like I'm a 5-year-old.
Yeah. Okay.
Get it right. And so the word data, like,
Data.
let's talk about that. What does that mean? Data means the information that we take away from the trial, right? Data sounds like a science word. Sorry. That
No,
like you're
you're
going to
right.
be a guinea pig. Am I like going to be on a list somewhere? No, you are not. It's basically what we learn from the science. So when a group of people, however big or small they are, they take this drug and we watch what happens to them. Do they get better? Is it safe? Do they have different side effects? And so all of that information is what we call data that we collect. And we put into a report that basically either gets that drug approved by the FDA or not, right? And so it's really important for people to understand that, like, what we're looking at is how this works on your body relative to everybody else who's in the trial, and how it's different from the standard of care drug that other people are taking, or how that's in your body. So it's really important for us to know these things. So I just did a focus group 2 weeks ago for one class of drugs, of breast cancer drugs. It was like it's a technology that's kind of new, and it was all Black women, and they all had a dosage problem. So they all basically reduced the dose after 3 months. And guess why? Because they had never tested these drugs, this class of drugs, on Black women. And guess what? Our bodies reacted to a different dose.
Totally.
Right. So those are the kinds of things we're looking at when we say data, or really this figuring out what works. Right. I'm sorry, Kanta, go ahead, babe.
Yes, Keontae, please share your point of view on this.
No, I was just going to hop into what Dr. James was saying about information. And at GCI Health, I'm a communicator by day, by passion, all the things. And again, using my mother and grandmother as an example of, well, why didn't you all know about clinical trials? Because the other part of that, my mom said, well, if I was asked to be a part of a clinical trial, I would say yes, because I know that it'll help someone else. And so you sit in rooms sometimes and people say, well, Black women are hard to reach. And I'm like, I don't think that's true. So we did a survey. We surveyed 500 Black women and asked them pretty basic questions. Have you ever been asked to be a part of a clinical trial? And if you were asked, would you say yes? Most of the ladies we talked to, about 73% said they have never been asked to be a part of a clinical trial, and almost 40% of them were living with a chronic condition. But when we asked them, would you say yes, 8% participate if asked. So for me, I'm like, well, this is a communications issue. It's not that Black women are hard to reach. We are hardly being reached by folks where we could benefit from science and the medicine, as you just talked about. And so I look at sort of a communication advocacy groups like When We Trial. Merck is obviously doing great work. I think everyone is sort of doing the work, but how do we do more of it to make sure that every Black woman knows about what a clinical trial is, where they are in relation to her, the people behind it, because there are a lot of leaders who look like us who are driving this work. And so for me, I always think that I can't opt into or opt out of something unless I'm able to opt in. And that means I need the information. With information comes knowledge. With knowledge comes empowerment. And I think that's what, hopefully, I think we're moving toward. How can we give Black women the tools? We already know everything. We can advocate for ourselves. I think we've been doing it, for centuries, right? But how can we be given the information or ask the right questions and to advocate for ourselves and for our loved ones? Because I think we're a part of medicine and we're a part of the future.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And, we can't find Black women. Give me a break. You find us for beauty products. You find us for food. You find us for all the things that people are advertising on all the media that we're consuming. So, but that's, we have to do it ourselves. That's why BlackDoctor.org is so important, to have this platform, to even do my show and talk to people, talk to our people, because also I think there's a voice of trust here. And I know our When We Trial campaign is working because it's Black women talking to each other, and people can go on and see women that look like them and say, sign me up. I want to do that, and we've now signed up 26,135 Black women for trial in the past 3 years.
Amazing.
You know what? It's not enough, guys. And I don't know what that number means relative to that 3% participation number. Nobody at the FDA has ever been able to tell me, okay, 3% of what? What does that fraction mean, right? To know what our number is relative to, which is kind of crazy where the number comes from. But anyway, so much work to do. And I'm so happy that you guys are all doing it, with us, for us, but it has to come from us because we're amazing. I mean, Black women are just amazing. We are. We're amazing beings in every way, right?
So that goes into what are some of the consequences of us not being seen? I know that Black women make up a fairly strong, we're reaching 14% of the population. So given that number, what are some of these consequences of us not being represented in clinical research? Can you tell us, Amanda Bishop?
Well, when you don't have us represented, then it's really pretty much what was stated. When we're not represented, then you don't have a good idea of how the medicines will perform within our bodies. What happens?
Oh, did we get cut off?
We lost her. You guys there?
We're here.
I'm here. I just see the screen. Okay. Oh, how'd you get here?
Wait,
Dr. Keith came on and we lost our other people.
we got to switch back.
Yeah, switch back, Asia.
Amanda,
You're not on yet. We'll get you in a minute.
yeah, we'll catch you in a minute.
Oh. Uh-oh.
1 second.
Technical difficulties. Hey, Dr. Wendy.
Yes, hi, Dr. Wendy.
We'll catch you guys in a minute. Technical difficulties. We'll get it together, people. I don't need to go online. We are live, so hold on, everybody. We are. There we go. We lost you guys. You went into Cyberland for a minute.
I think Amanda's still missing, though.
I know Amanda's still missing.
Yeah.
She'll be back in a moment. She was making some really great point. But until Amanda gets back, Dr. James, what do you believe are some of the consequences of us not being seen in clinical trials?
Absolutely. So just to build on what Amanda was saying, there are drugs, so you look at all of us on screen, right? We're Black women, but we're all different. And our bodies are different. Our physiology is different. Not just how the drug behaves in our bodies can be different, but how our bodies behave on the drug. So how we absorb it, how we metabolize it, those types of things that really all play into what kind of dose you get, how frequently do you get the dose. Those are all really important. And there are examples, published examples that talk about drugs that have behaved differently in Black populations. If I were just to give a couple of examples, like in glaucoma, some of the drugs that are standard of care, the dose has to be different in Black patients. The timing of taking the dose, those eye drops, when we take those, that's very important. And without having those data, right? And that wasn't learned until much later. The drug had been approved, it was out there, people were using it, but were we using it to the best ability, to best for us? That is the question, right? And I think as we go into clinical trials, both the patient and the physicians who are involved in the clinical trials, those questions are very similar. What is best for the patient? What is the best dose for me? We talk about diabetes, different drugs for diabetes, cardiovascular. That's a big one. There are drugs that simply do not work well in Black people that are being used in Black people. There are better options, and clinical trials gives us that opportunity to not only evaluate it, getting representative patient populations, but also saying, what are we going to do with the information we've collected? How does that impact how we deliver this drug to the patient?
Right. And you know what, Taylin? I would be dead
Mm.
So when I had triple negative breast cancer, I did all the things. I had a double mastectomy. I did the standard of care drugs at the time. I did radiation, and my cancer came back in a year, almost exactly a year to the date. And so had I not advocated for myself and gotten into a trial drug, I would be dead because my doctor was saying, we have nothing else for you, Ricky. Go live, you got 2 years to live. Go work it out. And I'm like, no, I'm not going to die right now. But that drug, that experimental drug, which is now a standard of care drug for triple negative breast cancer, I was able to take it and stay alive. And so think of all the women in my situation. I mean, and a lot of the women we're talking about, because they're thinking of trials as a last resort, they come to us and say, can you get me in a trial? And frankly, it should be a consideration at your first treatment. You shouldn't be waiting till you were like me and there was nothing else, right? Because there's so many things to test. And so not only is it important because we want to find out how it reacts on our bodies, but it could save your life.
Yeah.
Definitely. This shows that, we don't just have to sit by and be bystanders in our own health. We have options.
Right.
Yeah,
Right.
What are your thoughts, Keontae?
I mean, I think I'm just thinking about what you're just saying, and I'm reminded of a woman also diagnosed with breast cancer, and she saw a flyer at her doctor's office about a trial, and she called them, and no one called her back. So she waited, and she called them, and they were like, "Oh, well, you can come, but you have to pay for travel and hotel." And so she had to kind of crowdfund to go up there to the site. Thankfully, she's still here with us. But even sometimes she says it's not a clinical trials journey, it's a clinical trials trip, because it's a trip. Just like the different obstacles a lot of folks sometimes have to go through. But thankfully, like you said, she's still here. And now that medication is sort of the standard of care. And I just think it's 2025. I think we have enough imagination, we have enough creativity. I think it's about courage and will to be able to actually implement the things I think that you, Dr. James, just said. We know the science. We know that our bodies react differently. This isn't new. So why aren't we just embedding this type of practice into the work? But obviously, like you all just mentioned, when you do see diversity in clinical trials, I think from a business perspective, because I think sometimes this is what it boils down to, you have greater efficacy. It works better on everybody. So you're able to grow the market. People are like, oh my God, I love this medicine. It saved my life. It did this, it did these things. So we also, I think, unfortunately have to frame diversity in trials being good for science, but also being great for business. So just something else to consider there.
Amanda, we see you're back. We were just discussing some of the potential consequences of Black folks not being represented in clinical trials. Do you have any thoughts on that?
And I could hear a lot of what you were saying, at least for a part of the time. And what I will say is this, in order to really be able to know what's happening with our bodies, to understand diseases and conditions, to understand preventative factors, and to understand treatment effectiveness, it's just very important that we're included in clinical trials. That is how that data, that information is generated, because that allows you to see, as the examples that were given, that allows you to see what's happening in the Black body as opposed to other bodies, and is there a difference? Does it operate the same way, or is there a difference? And that's why it's very important that we're included in those trials.
Definitely. I know we're winding down on time, but please tell our audience how we can all reach you all and discover your work and, learn how Black folks or Black women in particular can get more involved in clinical trials. Amanda, you can start.
Well, I work for Merck. So really, you can always go to Merck's website and be able to access us. And you can actually see all of the clinical trials that Merck is doing on the website. So that's one great thing. in terms of learning, getting access to our trials. But honestly, all trials are on clinicaltrials.gov as well. So they can be looked up there also, because we really do encourage in participation in clinical trials. And, also we encourage educating the communities about clinical trials, because knowledge, of course, will help you to understand and help you to be empowered so that everyone can make a decision for themselves and for their families. And so that's how you can reach us.
Absolutely.
And that's how you can learn more about clinical trials.
Great. Keontae, how can we learn more about your work?
Yes, so you can find me on LinkedIn at Keontae Key. Again, I'm a cultural marketing lead at GCI Health. We support pharmaceutical companies and trial sites on bringing digital communications into the work, treating the patient participant as a consumer. Like you said earlier, we can reach them about healthcare care products on Instagram. I'm also going to reach you about clinical trials on Instagram as well. We're also talking to influencers, how we might use influencers to be able to amplify not only specific clinical trials, but the value of clinical trial awareness, teaching them about the steps, and also using communications to talk about sort of those historical moments of distrust. When we talk about Henrietta Lacks, sort of the Tuskegee syphilis experiment, being able to educate and then talk about what informed consent means, why those things should not happen anymore, because there are standards that the federal government has put into place to make sure that you are protected and that you are safe. Again, I think communications, narrative, storytelling are critical to being able to actually see an increase in more Black women being trial. So I'm happy to lead that work at GCI Health. And you can also go to GCI Health to download the report, Layered Black Women's Perceptions of Clinical Trials. And it has all the data in there about our survey.
Great.
Awesome.
Dr. James, where can we learn more about you and everything you do?
Oh, sure. So my professional profile on LinkedIn, you can always start there, but we also have a website, dhnrx.com. And that is where we share our expertise, experience, information around different health conditions, but also strategies of how to really bridge this gap between drug companies and patient populations, whether these patient populations are through advocacy groups, individuals. We have a number of different types of outreach. And our diversity is Black women for sure, Black men, because prostate cancer, we didn't bring that up, but I know that is at the top of mind for many of us in this country today. And but also across other therapeutic areas and other groups that really build out the definition of diversity, including those with other abilities and those in our Native American populations. And so we have partnered with a number of organizations to help with that outreach as well.
Wonderful. Thank you all so much for joining in.
Yeah, thank you so much. Thank you so much, friends.
Yes.
Thank you. Have a good day.
All right, have a blessed day. Stay healthy. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
So we have another panel coming up, right, Taylin? Next one.
Yes. Our next esteemed guest will be for our second segment, How Clinical Trials Can Mitigate Black Disease.
Great.
So this will move us to the back.
Oh,
Yeah.
no, you should leave the studio, Dr. James.
Yeah.
Okay.
Hello again, Ricky.
Hey, two of my besties are coming up.
I know. I'm so excited to see them. I know we were just discussing prostate cancer very briefly, so
Yeah.
I'm looking forward to everyone meeting Dr. Crawford and Dr. Garvin Mayo.
Yeah, they're my lovies. I'm so excited to have them. But yeah, Taylor, we were talking earlier about just our biology is different, And I was recently in London at Guy Cancer Center where we're doing some of our Sambai research, this research project we're working on. And they showed me under a microscope 2 different cells, a white one versus a black TNBC cell, and they look nothing alike. But the other thing that didn't look alike was our immune systems.
Oh,
So
really?
a white immune cell and a black immune cell. And so they look totally different. So in this cancer research that we're doing, this is for triple negative breast cancer. They were studying not only the difference in the cells of the cancer, but in the immune system cells. So if our immune systems don't interact with the cancer cells the way that white ones do and interact with the drugs the way that white ones do, it's a whole nother layer of study. You know, so we can look at all of these things, and that's why this research is so important.
Most definitely. So I'm really looking forward to our next chat, where we'll be speaking with Dr. Keith Crawford, who is the Director of Clinical Trials and Patient Education. Keith Crawford joined FEN in 2019 as Director of Clinical Trials and Patient Education. He is responsible for implementing programs in these areas, as well as working with patients and FEN partners. And Dr. Wendy Garvin Mayo, who is a passionate doctorate-prepared board-certified nurse practitioner. She's dedicated to providing compassionate, comprehensive, and collaborative mental health support for cancer patients and cancer survivors on their journey to recovery and beyond. So nice to see you both here.
Hey.
Hello.
Hello.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Dr. Crawford. How are you?
I'm doing all right. How are you guys doing?
Good. I was saying we get to have 2 of my besties on the next.
So we're in trouble today.
No, we're going to take it easy on you. But Ricky and I were just discussing, the differences between, Black bodies and non-Black bodies, and how clinical trials can be kind of a guiding light for learning how to treat our bodies specifically. So since you're both, healthcare professionals, what are the most significant health disparities affecting Black Americans today? We can start with you, Dr. Mayo.
Yeah. So, when you talk about health disparities and, just Black Americans, if you look at the statistics, everything, right? From heart disease, cancer, diabetes, even mental health, which is, my side of the coin. And there's a lot of things related to that, where we could talk about racism, we could talk about inequities, but Black individuals, we are at a disadvantage, and everything impacts us. And I like to talk about stress a lot. Black individuals in America specifically have higher levels of stress. I'm not sure if you heard of the minority stress model, where at a baseline, we experience more stress related to prejudice, discrimination, which leads to a lot of these chronic illnesses, such as diabetes, high blood pressure, and cancers. So I would say a lot of the chronic illnesses are higher in the minority population.
Mm-hmm. Dr. Crawford, can you speak from your perspective?
Well, in kind of dovetail, we have a disparity that exists, and this disparity has always been in our society. Mm-hmm. Whether it's socioeconomic, people want to put it there, but I do agree with Dr. Mayo. We're under a chronic state of stress. And what people don't even recognize, you won't even talk about it, is they'll talk about stress as it relates to other groups. Post-traumatic stress syndrome, but we have the concept of post-traumatic stress associated with post-surgery, post-slavery, Jim Crow law, post-traumatic stress. Then everything that's moving on, we're constantly being exposed. I'm older than 50, is how I'll put it out there, but I still have anxiety about when I hear, not even getting pulled over, but when I hear a police car siren. So I didn't do anything wrong, but the back of my hair on my neck stands up if I had some. So So, but I do agree.
No, but Ricky, I know since you're a breast cancer survivor, you know this disease better than most people I know. What are some particular things that you've learned, just being in the breast cancer space, of how it affects Black women differently than others?
Well, we know it does. We know now that on a cellular level, our breast cancer is different, and we now have data to prove it. And now we have so much research in place that's validating that a Black breast cancer cell looks different from a white one. And as I was saying a few minutes ago, our immune system cells are different too. And so the research has to happen for us, and we must advance the science, or we're going to keep dying. I mean, I think even Keith can share a story about prostate, but we're seeing that in prostate. We're seeing that in cardiology. I think we're going to talk about that in a little while. But in all of these things, our bodies are different. Our biology is different. Our genetics are different. Our genomics are different. The biology of our cancer cells, our environments are different. And we're seeing where we get some women and they have a stage 2 breast cancer and we cure it, right? We give them all the treatment, they get better, but they go back home to live in Cancer Alley, or they go back home to live in Rochester, New York, or they go back home where they lived in Flint, Michigan, and the cancer's back in a year. So what was that, right? It was environmental. So all of these factors play into why we need to be considered, and our science needs to be considered different. And Keith, I was thinking about the study that Clayton's doing in Nigeria with the men that are taking immunotherapy. That I think immunotherapy had kind of been ruled out for prostate cancer as a way to treat it. And guess what? It was ruled out for white men. But when we tested it on some Black men, it worked. So Clayton's doing a trial in Nigeria of 60 Black men with immunotherapy, and they're thriving.
And that was a very important point. And this isn't the first time this has happened. The first immunotherapy that was, and when you hear this, it's going to be, it started in 2003. They didn't have enough clinical trial, Black male participation in the clinical trial. But when they looked at the data, it's just like, that's interesting. It looks marginally like Black men are doing a little bit better. It took them, so the clinical trial went from 2000 to 2010, 7 years to complete it and get FDA approval for a clinical trial. It was Dendreon, a vaccine-based, a cellular-based therapy, immune therapy cell. And then from 2010 to 2017, the real world data started to come in. So there's the phase 4 clinical trial, which is kind of a protocol-based clinical trial. Real world data.
In big words, say that again.
Okay. So when we go back, we're talking about clinical trials. So we have phase 1, 2, 3, and 4. Okay. Phase 1, we're just looking at to see if the drug we're using will not hurt anybody. Stage 2, now that we know it doesn't hurt anybody, now we want to figure out how the dosing, how much of the drug we can use. Stage 3, we figured out how much the drug is working. There's a good effect. Now we move to stage 3 and we do this large study where we bring in as many people as possible. That I flag this is because even doing phase 3 studies, somewhere between 4 from prostate cancer space, but it probably apply very closely with breast cancer, that between 4 and 7% participation of Black men in a clinical trial, when there's a need for 22% participation to 25% Black men. So I just flagged that because that's something we could talk about later on. But going back to this study, this was an immunotherapy that kind of supports what Ricky was saying. They found that after 7 years, Black men didn't do better marginally, not 10%, not 15%, like doubling the life expectancy of Black men. There's a clinical trial and nobody has even heard about this one. This is just messed up. And I say it this way, not in a negative sense, But this is why we are here. That's why Ricky and I are here talking to you about this. And Dr. Mayo's online with us also, what we have to do. A clinical trial was conducted at a reputable institution, and the clinical trial is called Panther, out of Duke, Dan George. And what he discovered was he had two drugs, drug A and drug B. Well, drug A, when you tried it on white men, it worked the same as drug B when you tried it on white men. And when drug A was tried on black men, it was the same as drug B. So, big deal. The problem was when you combine the drugs together, it had no impact on white men. But when you combine it together for black men, it doubled the life expectancy.
That's such an interesting point you bring up. I want to lead into how kind of systemic racism is even keeping us out of these trials. The fact that nobody really knew about this, and the fact that there is a drug that actually worked better for black men than it did for white men. How is that not major knowledge? So how is that not?
How do people not know this, right?
Well, but you have, is it systemic racism or at the end of the day, and that's one. There's money. What group can we make a lot of money from, and what group yells a lot? The squeaky wheel gets the oil. That's just the way it's working. And so we sit back from a negative perception. Well, racism. Like, look, we have to be hammering out there, telling people this is the drug that we need to use.
Yeah.
We need to do that. Our voices are going to have to go above the noise.
Yes,
Yeah.
for sure.
Absolutely. Dr. Mayo, what are your thoughts on how Black folks can be a little bit more vocal about clinical trials and how we can really look at it to, mitigate some of these problems? I know you talk about stress in cancer survivors, and that is such a unique condition that we deal with, with weathering PTSD. So how can Black folks be a little bit more open about clinical trials and finding what's for us?
Yeah, it starts with forums like this, for people actually seeing people that look like them talk about clinical trials. That's why the work we do is so important. It's that visibility to educate. And, like Ricky doing a great job in including Black women in breast cancer clinical trials, right? They see Ricky, they trust her, right? Because this whole, mistrust, distrust in the system that continues to keep us down. We could talk about cultural competencies and all of that, but I knew you had some pharmaceutical individuals on here earlier.
Yeah, you did. I'm sorry, and they told you to look at clinicaltrials.gov. I'm like, what?
I know. I
said, like, what? I said, have you looked at clinicaltrials.gov? I'm like, but I'll be quiet. Let me be quiet. Let me just zip that up.
That one, Keith, and I couldn't get it. I knew we'd come back to it, but yeah.
But even having women like them in their position in the pharmaceutical industry is so important, because they could be the voice for those minorities on how to attract them, how to engage them, and also boots on the ground, right? They're out there saying, we are conducting clinical trials. They're safe. People trust people that look like them. So, but I also think we also have to look at providers in hospitals. They're saying cultural competence, which is a 1-hour webinar once a year. That's not enough. I think organizations have to take responsibility of who they're hiring and how passionate they are about really inclusion, diversity. Yes, I'm saying it, and equity. These things are important. So we also have to look at that lens as well. Is who are we hiring? Do they really believe in, to Dr. Keith's point, you have a Black patient with prostate cancer. Are you offering him the clinical trial? Many people aren't asked. They don't know about it. So never mind being educated, they have no knowledge of it. Mm-hmm. So it's very complex. But I think the work we're doing is really trying to really break those barriers and bring more minorities into clinical trials and educating them so they can actually get the care and get exposure to these novel drugs to treat their cancer or any other disease.
So
make a quick point.
People just don't know. Go
The
ahead.
quick point, just wanted to add on to Dr. Mayo, from the standpoint of stress in the immune response. So what's important to recognize, and when we talk about the patients about their prostate cancer journey, and when Ricky and I, we talk about how important stress is, and what happens is your stress increases cortisol levels. When you increase your cortisol levels, you suppress your immune system. What people don't recognize is your immune system is constantly fighting off cancer cells. Cancer cells didn't just show up. Cancer cells have always been in place. The problem is that your immune system was optimal, proper nutrition, a large number of immune cells in place, and low cortisol levels. And so cortisol kind of suppresses your function. And then poor diet and no exercise. So we'll put it no exercise, poor diet, and stress. You put those three together, then the problem is you have a weakened immune system, and it allows, like what Ricky was saying, they do well at the clinical trial site, and then they go home and they're in that environment again, they weaken their immune system. And then and I think that I just wanted to comment on that before we moved on.
But even to that point, you just really put the whole thing together for us, right? We started off saying that, Black Americans have the highest stress level compared to their white counterparts, and have the highest numbers of chronic illnesses. So even before you even start talking about clinical trials and all this, the cards are already stacked against Black Americans. So, and this is the work I do. It's really taking control of your mind. How do we manage our stress, manage our mind? Because that mind-body connection is a real thing, real thing.
And at one time, more and more Black folks were going and I put my church hat on. My daddy was
I knew we were going to go to church. I knew we were going
to. At least once a week,
right?
You had therapy.
And you had a hug. You had a hug.
Somebody told you, I love you. You had community and harmony that suppressed the cortisol levels that increased your immune system, because you had love in a gathering that allowed you to go back out to deal with that microaggression. Come back to church again, then hugs and kisses, and you spiritually uplifted. It's like you do, like Ricky likes to row out there in the water, and when she's finished, I don't know what she does, but I know she's like, I gotta go take a shower and clean up. But she takes a hot shower after being out in the hot sun, and she feels cleansed. That's the way we all feel after we had that spiritual uplifting at church. Now we don't have it. We may watch NFL football on Sunday because that's the new God, or some kind of sports game, but the loss of connectivity, a loss of community therapy, which we don't have as much. And that's why when Dr. Mayo, when she was talking about behavioral health, mental health, why that's so important in our society, in our life, because we are not going to be able to troubleshoot. We can troubleshoot all we want to. We can adapt all we want to, but we got to be able to handle that stress.
Yeah.
And I want to make one point about, individuals who are stressed, Black Americans, minorities. When we are stressed, even though I'm saying awareness and education, it's hard for you to effectively take in information to understand and process. It's also hard to advocate for yourself. We always talk about, advocacy. But when you are stressed and you don't know how to deal with that, you can't do a lot of things. You almost feel paralyzed in a sense.
Right.
So it doesn't matter how much we're doing, you're not able to process, take it in, and actually, more importantly, move and do something with the information.
And that's what's so important, that whole point about stress at the time in which you're being stressed. And so what's interesting is this: if you're a patient and you go to the doctor, you receive the diagnosis, and the doctor's going to tell you you have cancer. Once they say you have cancer, you don't hear anything. Wah, wah, I'm back at Charlie Brown and the Peanuts. Wah, 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 wah. That's all you hear. That's why it's important to have somebody there who can listen for you and then help you manage the stress. But the moment you have cancer, you already had stress. Now you put super stress. And then you're asking us, well, you have to advocate for yourself. And like, well, how am I going to talk to a doctor?
Right.
who've had like medical school, college medical school, fellowship, and now they're about 10 years out. I don't have that ability, and that's why advocacy. That's why it's important for advocates to be there.
Yes.
This reminds me so much of a story about a young woman whose father had prostate cancer, and he didn't understand a single thing, and she was still very young. She was just trying to understand, like, wow, my dad has cancer. And luckily she had an uncle who was a doctor, who was able to kind of come in, listen, understand, and show him, like, hey, you have options. There's a clinical trial that can work for you, that can, extend your life. And thankfully it did. And her father ultimately did pass away, due to his old age, but she had 8 extra years with him after
See,
that diagnosis.
and
Yeah.
that's why Ricky and I, Dr. Mayo, we the uncle and aunties of
Yeah.
health.
I love
You
that.
can just call me Uncle Keith, okay?
I love that. I love that.
Okay, but I think and even in your area, Wendy, I think and you're the doctor here. Our bodies deal with stress differently than white people. So I was part of a study at Georgetown, and we don't have the results yet with the impact of stress on being a breast cancer survivor. So and it's like a 3-year study. So I was in part of year 1. So I'm interested to see what that looks like. But I know stress caused my breast cancer. But I know, but there should be some study of that. Like, are we studying the impact of stress on our outcomes? Because it's got to be different.
And
Yeah, I know there were articles where, women with breast cancer said they were diagnosed at one of the most stressful times in their lives.
Yeah.
And one thing I want to insert to this conversation is that this discussion we're having, it's important for providers to understand and assess patients for stress, for anxiety, for depression, and provide them with those resources, because that's another gap, right? We're saying, yes, people are stressed. They don't hear anything once you say you have cancer. But then what happens? You need your scan, you need your blood work, you need like all these things happen, and the patient is left there in a state of paralysis, right?
Right.
So
Right.
we have to understand that people need help and resources to help mitigate that.
And that's why they come back to us, because I say, for example, you brought something over. I just published a peer-reviewed paper in urology practice, and it talked about the identification of factors affecting the enrollment accrual of Black men into prostate cancer clinical trials in the United States. That's why we need to be there, because I'm not going to point the finger at the general population. I'm not. I said, what have we had to do? What have we done since 1620, 1619? That's troubleshoot, problem solve, and adapt. I call it TPSA. And this is what we have to do right now. And what sitting here on this panel this morning is what we have to do. This is what Ricky says, this is what our God job is. And this is what we have to do.
Yes. So it sounds like this is all a multi-pronged approach. It starts, one, prevention, stress, which leads to disease. Black folks already have higher incidence of disease, and studies are showing that stress is a huge part of it. Yeah. But also it's up to, once this disease happens, it's up to doctors to show Black folks that they have more options, that clinical trials are available, but it's also up to Black folks to not only advocate for themselves, but have someone who can help us advocate for ourselves, whether it's a friend, family member, amazing aunts and aunties in this right now.
So I can ask you a question. Can we shift that around and move from a dependent position to an independent position moving forward? It is our responsibility, to advocate for ourselves, to get as much information as possible, because we can't expect doctors to do it for us. We can have that discussion, because now think about this. Back in the day, the doctor tells you what to do and you go do it. Go fetch. I fetched it. Okay. Now the issue is they're telling patients to share in the decision-making process. Now, how can you share in the decision-making process if you don't have enough information to share or provide input? That's why we move from a dependent position to a independent position, where we are educated And we, like you said, we have to pull as much information. And we know that everybody can't do it. That's why Ricky, Dr. Mayo are on this line right now, and Black Doctor exists, right?
Yeah, that's why we're here. Yeah. We need to be here and do this, have these conversations.
Amazing, amazing. I know we're coming up on time, but Dr. Garvin Mayo, tell us how we can reach you.
Yep, you can reach me at collaborativecancercare.com. Go to the website. You can see our programs, how we advocate, and how we assist.
Dr. Crawford, how can our amazing viewers reach you and learn more about how they can get involved?
Well, they can let them know that we will respond to you within 24 hours, and we kind of keep it simple because Prostate Health Education Network is long. So what we just say is RAP Cancer, RAP cancer.org. So RAP, Rally Against Prostate Cancer. So it's RAP cancer.org. And you can go to the site, type in your name, and then we'll get in contact with you in 24 hours. If not that day, because I'll call you back. Once I get your message, I'll call back.
He'll call you back instantly. It doesn't even take
let me rephrase that. Instantly and on the weekends. I don't want to hear any excuse from anybody talking about, it was Friday at 5 o'clock.
Yeah.
There's nobody there to call me. So you can prove me wrong.
Right.
But
I love that.
And Taylor, Dr. Wendy is going to do 2 Protect Your Peace sessions for us on this Thursday at 8 o'clock and next Tuesday at 8 o'clock, because it's Mental Health Month too,
Yeah.
But she's going to do so we're going to have 2 conversations. Protect your peace, because I always say your peace is non-negotiable, and you got to find it. And I had to find mine by getting cancer.
Now I know where that peace is non-negotiable came from. Okay.
No, I came from, but I had to find my peace from getting cancer. I had to work through the fact that stress was causing it to get to peace.
Can I add one thing before we end the session?
Yes, of course.
To Dr. Keith's point, the independence, anyone out there, being independent is trying something new, because sometimes it's hard to ask for help or accept help. If you have a cancer diagnosis, you don't know something, try something new. Let someone help you.
Yeah.
Come into the fold, right? And I know sometimes that's hard, but just try to be uncomfortable. Be comfortable being uncomfortable, and let us really take the journey with you.
Yeah.
And that's an important point, that we're moving to this era, the 21st century, not horses and buggies, Teslas. That means treatment options out there are going to be cutting edge.
Yes.
And when the doctor says you have cancer, you're not going to die in 2 months. Right. Because the treatment options that are out there, we have men who were diagnosed with metastatic prostate cancer that I can put you on the line with that are 8 years out.
Right.
And the president, I don't know how long he was diagnosed.
Now, right? What's happening now? Biden,
and so he still has treatments that he hasn't even been exposed to. So don't give up. We don't want anybody to give up.
No.
You can live with cancer, because we're moving towards making cancer a chronic disease. It's not exactly like hypertension and diabetes, but we're moving in that direction.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Well, thank you all so much for this amazing segment. I'm so glad that everyone knows how they can contact you, how they can learn more. This was wonderful. I learned so much.
Thanks, you guys. Thank you, my family. They're my family.
Take it easy.
See you next time.
All right. Bye.
And I'm going to go off for a minute now, right, Taylor? I'll be
no
back.
problem. I got you, Ricky.
Yeah. Am I supposed to stay on? I'll stay on.
You can turn your cam off for a moment if you need to step away.
I'm good. Okay.
Hello, everyone.
Hello, everyone.
Hi.
Hello, hello. I believe, let's see, we have Eleanor.
Hello, everyone.
Hello, Dr. Farku. Hello, Dr. Castello-Lopez. Hello. So we are moving into our third segment, building and maintaining trust in clinical trials. We're going to be talking about some common myths, misconceptions, and basically how can we work together to mitigate some of these issues that are keeping Black folks out of clinical trials. And I want to introduce our esteemed panelists. I'll start with Dr. Michael Farku. He is the Vice Dean of Research and Clinical Trials at Cedars-Sinai Health System in Los Angeles. We also have Amanda Bishop, who is the Diversity and Inclusion Lead at Merck. We have Eleanor Sales, who is the Director of Clinical Research and the Operations and Board Member at Diversity Health Networks. And we also have Dr. Yelva Castellon-Lopez, who is Faculty and Research Scientist at Cedars-Sinai. So happy to have all of you here.
Thank you.
Thank you for having us.
Great to be here.
Great, yes, please. Let's start with Amanda and Eleanor. What are some common myths and misconceptions about clinical trials in the Black community, and why do you think we have them? Amanda, you can start.
Well, I think one misconception is the thought that if you participate in a clinical trial, that means you're going to be a guinea pig. And this is one of the common concerns, I've heard myself. And so let me just take a few moments and speak about the guinea pig myth. Really, I think this comes from the fact that there really is distrust for the medical community and for clinical research. And that's because people's race and people's social economic status have been used against them. And for that reason, there's this thought that, can you trust? Can you trust this process? And are they just going to be experimenting on me? So then how can these patients or potential patients, how can the community actually be reassured that they are not being treated like guinea pigs? And I think that's where we come in. I think that it's important that patients feel reassured that they're not being treated like guinea pigs. And so this is why it's important that the community feels knowledgeable. And I think that's where we really have to do a better job, is to help the community feel knowledgeable about a clinical trial entails. Because if you know what it entails, and then you can make a decision for yourself, you can make a decision for your families, and then they'll feel more empowered to make those decisions, because it's difficult to make a decision when you don't have information. So some of the things that are important to know, or for the potential patients to know, is one, clinical trials follow strict ethical guidelines, regulatory standards. They're designed to protect participants' rights and safety, and that's why those guidelines are in place. The other thing that's important for them to know that is, before they would enroll in a clinical trial, participants have to receive detailed information about the study. And so they have to be given detailed information about the study's purpose, about the procedures, about potential risks, as well as the benefits. And then the other thing that I think will help them is to understand that you get to ask questions, and you can ask questions in the beginning, or you can ask questions later and throughout the whole process, because you might come up with questions later. So that's fine, but you really have the ability to ask questions throughout the entire process. And the other thing I think would be very helpful is that if it was known by everyone that when you enroll in a clinical trial, you can choose to leave the clinical trial at any time. You don't have to, you didn't make a decision that you can't get out of. If you decide for any reason that you no longer wish to be a part of the clinical trial, you can actually exit the clinical trial. And that's what's known as informed consent. And the consenting process allows you to make a voluntary, because it is a choice. You still have free will, so it is a choice. It's voluntary, and so you can make this voluntary choice and have well-informed decisions about your participation if you choose to do so. So I think that's I would say one of the important common myths and concerns that's really surfaces within our community. I think there's another one around, I would say around the participation, and I've heard this one myself, that, there are some that think that clinical trial participation is extremely expensive for the participant. And so I think having information communicated here that speaks to them knowing and understanding that even before you would participate in a clinical trial, before you would enroll in a clinical trial, participants have to receive detailed information about the potential costs. So that's one of the things that you would receive up front. Clinical trial sponsors and health insurance may cover some of the costs. Some of the costs associated may cover some of the costs associated with the study-related procedures, with the treatments and the medical care. And that doesn't mean that everything will be covered, because participants may be asked to pay for some treatment procedures not covered by insurance or the sponsors. But what I can say is some trials may offer reimbursement for some participation, some of the participants' study-related expenses. So I think just providing more information helps to address some of the concerns that are out there, because there are a lot of myths and a lot of misconceptions surrounding clinical trials.
Absolutely, absolutely. Eleanor, you work in clinical operations. What are some concerns that you see in your work?
So some of the myths that I've heard or have been told, I will touch on. The biggest one is what Amanda touched on, of course, but the other one that I've heard of is that you have to be really sick to be part of the clinical trial. And this is obviously not true, because we actually look for all stages, all people in all stages, healthy volunteers included. So you don't have to be really sick to participate in clinical trials. And actually you participating as a healthy person helps us build the data that we need to show whether this drug actually works in humans or not.
That's a very key point. That's a very key point. So, Dr. Farku, Dr. Castellón-Lopez, you're both healthcare providers. How can healthcare providers in research better address these concerns that patients have? You've heard a lot from Eleanor and Amanda. So, how can healthcare providers kind of mitigate some of these worries? Either of you can go first.
I may go first. First of all, thank you for having me. It's a great honor to be here and to share our insights and to hear others' perspectives. I think the first and foremost is that when we enroll patients in clinical trials, there already are patients. There are already patients in the system, or they have an attending physician. So we're part of the care circle, a circle of care with regards to patients. So to reassure patients that their outcomes, to make their life better, and to emphasize to them that this will make others' lives better, including their family, their friends, their neighbors. I think from the perspective of the investigator, we have to reassure patients that we have their best interests in mind. And there's a great statistic that shows that if you're in a clinical trial, regardless of what you receive or what diagnostic or therapeutic intervention you're randomized to, you have better outcomes. You have better surveillance, better contact with healthcare providers, more comprehensive care. So just by being in a trial, you're more likely to have better healthcare. Now, there are many myths and many historical events that have occurred that have led to mistrust. And I think we need to acknowledge that. And one of the ways that we're working on this in our clinical trials networks is the congruency of patients with providers. So we have noticed from some of our colleagues on the East Coast that if they have a Black patient, patients are more receptive to clinical trials if the investigator and or the research coordinator also come from the same ethnic group. So if it's a Black patient, having folks from the Black community on our staff that approach the patients has been very effective, because they see someone that's like them and they identify with them, and there's already a bond there that you have to build on. But the fact remains that there are these issues of mistrust. And I think we've seen this not only in the Black community, this translates to other diverse communities as well, including women, and of course, Hispanic populations. And so, we really have to be sensitive about that, because going into it, if there's mistrust, then we have to tackle it. And this has to be on a community basis. The second element is to bring the community into the perspective, to go out to the churches, to the community centers, and enlist the participation of the community in the clinical trial. This is something that we've done with prevention clinical trials, where we're trying to improve the health of individuals who may not yet have disease. And so all of this speaks to the fact that we have to have the connection with the patient, and we have to gain the trust. So much in medicine is we assume we have the trust. And I think that this is something that we've learned from working with the Black community, which is such an important element to our lives here in Los Angeles, Southern California, and nationally. We need to have representation of the population of the United States in our trials. If everybody is white and middle class, then we're not going to be able to generalize the findings of clinical trials into the community. And so we really need to work as a team together. And it's going to be a journey, but I think we're all up to it, all with the goal of improving human health.
Definitely. And just simply not including the proper populations, it's just bad science. It's just bad science. If we don't know how certain medications or certain treatments affect people of color, women, people of different genders and sexualities, how are we going to properly know the full scope of it? What are your thoughts, Dr. Castellan-Lopez, as a research scientist?
Absolutely. And I couldn't agree more with everything that's already been said. And I just have to speak to the organization blackdoctor.org, because it's organizations like yours and the work that you're doing today that help us build trust. So thank you for having us on and allowing us to share some of our work. We did some work with the community during the COVID-19 vaccine trials, because we definitely saw underrepresentation of communities of color in those trials. And one of the approaches that we used, and one that I use all the time, because I know as we're stepping into the community, there is historical context, and I think we have to acknowledge that, and that's already been said. But I think also, in addition to what's been said, is working with the community and listening, right? Like a lot of times we come into communities and we sort of, think that we know, but I think if we stop and listen, that's a really great way to start to build trust, and then building a bi-directional relationship, right? Where it's not just one-sided, right? And I think that some of the other components could be transparency, for example, transparency in both the risks and the benefits of trials, making information and trial relevant information available to the public in accessible language, explaining the process, expectations, and risks and benefits. And again, I can't stress enough working with trusted messengers. All of the trials that I work on, I have a community advisory panel, and they help me through all the steps of the trial, not just the recruitment, but also looking at the results and disseminating the findings, which I think is also something that we have to remember to do, is circle back around with our communities and let them know, what did we learn from your participation? Because I think that can help build trust also. And then community-centered trials, right? So decentralizing and coming and meeting people where they are. I think that's crucial, and a direction that I see some trials, moving into. And this will allow us to address things like transportation, childcare concerns, right? Some of the barriers that we know exist. And then having relationships and building trust over time, I think, is also important. Not just coming to a community that one time when you're trying to recruit, but really establishing long-term relationships of give and take, right? And I think that those are all things, and folks who are committed to equity. I think that that's also incredibly important, is having representation in the researcher side with folks who are committed to promoting equity.
Definitely, definitely. I actually attended back in March. I saw that Cedars had this really great symposium about Henrietta Lacks and her story, and kind of talking about, her legacy, to how that's actually informed a lot of myths and misconceptions about clinical trials. So I love that you guys were able to bring Henrietta's family, bring Rebecca Skloot, the author of the Henrietta Lacks story. It was great that you were able to bring all of them there to just kind of talk about this, talk about her legacy, talk about how it's kind of created a legacy of mistrust, and how healthcare providers and how pharmaceutical companies at large and how hospitals at large can just do better by the Black patient population. So thank you all for that. So that brings me into my next question is, how can community engagement and education initiatives better increase this understanding and participation? Eleanor, I want to start with you on that question.
Thanks. So I think the community outreaches usually have the resources that we can trust, right? That the participants can actually go in with some questions. You have to be ready to have the tough conversations. You have to touch the reasons why there's mistrust in clinical trials. And some of these locations and resources actually have that information for you. Ask the questions, get the facts for yourself, and actually reach out to other resources like clinicaltrials.gov. There's more information there about clinical trials, and then just really talk about it. If you have specific concerns about a specific drug, if you have a partner or a doctor that you can talk to about these drugs, please talk to that person, because you have to use the available resources to get the information that you're looking for. Sometimes the internet will provide information that is just simply false, just because there's everybody out there that's just posting all kinds of information, but there are actually good websites and good doctors out there that can give you the information with any specific drug. What are the side effects? What are the options available to me before I even participate in some of the clinical trials that are out there?
Amanda, what do you think are some community engagement opportunities when discussing clinical trials?
Well, I really do believe that community engagement is important, and that we do have to do everything we can to empower the community. And I believe that empowering the community comes as a result of educating the community. So ensuring that all the information that we have, that we really are transparently sharing with the community really what clinical trials are about, how you can actually be involved in a clinical trial, also how to speak with their healthcare provider so that their healthcare provider can help assist them in obtaining information regarding clinical trials, and also being okay with asking questions of their healthcare providers as well. And so I think whatever we do with the community, which is many different ways you can empower the community, it still always goes back to educating the community with the tools that they need so that they themselves as individuals can feel empowered with the knowledge that they have, and that they can utilize that knowledge not just for themselves, but share it with their family members as well. I can honestly say, even as growing up in the rural community that I did, I ended up being like that person, that trusted advisor for family members to come to regarding information, which was also shared with other members of the community. And so I do believe that it all goes back to providing the tools and the information in the community to those trusted advisors that are already present in there, and also equipping them with information that they can utilize to speak with their healthcare providers in order to obtain the information that they need or the clinical trials that they're interested in, even assistance to finding clinical trials, even if the healthcare provider doesn't come right out and ask them about it, that they might be armed with information so that they can take upon themselves to ask their healthcare provider as well.
Mm-hmm. Dr. Farku, how are you guiding your doctors and your PIs towards, the Black patient population to show them that clinical trials are an option and also that clinical trials are indeed safe?
Yeah, well, what we're doing with our investigators is we have some novel artificial intelligence technology that is going to allow us to identify patients when they're eligible for a trial. So when you're seeing a patient in the clinic, there'll be a prompt that says your patient is eligible for trial X. And that's going to make it convenient for the doctors not to have inherent bias where they may only approach patients that they think would be interested in participating, but it'll come to all patients. And we think that's going to eliminate biases that may exist subconsciously in physicians or historically their way that they practice. And it's going to be very important for underrepresented populations like the Black community to be able to be approached for clinical trials. And it'll be an opportunity. The second issue is that we are developing a strategy through our community engagement that we have like a buddy system. So Black patients that have participated in trials before could be supportive for patients who are considering randomizing in a clinical trial and understand the experiences. And they've gone through the same mistrust, the same anxieties about participating. And we think that's going to be another approach where through the community engagement, those that have had the experience and a positive experience of being in a clinical trial can help to recruit others so that they can get the best care. Again, all of this so that the patients are convinced themselves, as we all are, that they're getting better care because they're in a study and they're helping the community for future interventions.
Dr. Castellón-Lopez, do you care to elaborate on any of that since you work so directly with the patients?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that navigation and really leaning into our community health workforce, which usually represent are folks that are from the community, right, who have a desire to empower, is a great tool.
Absolutely. So what are some resources and support systems? I know, Dr. Castellón-Lopez, you mentioned community health workers, but what are some resources and support systems to help Black folks learn more about their clinical trial options? I'll start with you, Eleanor.
Sorry, can you repeat that? I kind of broke.
Oh, sorry. My question was, what are some resources and support systems to help Black folks learn more about clinical trials and how to participate?
So I mentioned clinicaltrials.gov earlier. I think that's the biggest resource out there. And there's also several other websites out there that can provide the information that we need, like askaboutclinicaltrials.org. And we also have like other websites like trajectory.com as well. Pharma also has the I'm In campaign. There's several resources that we can use to provide more information on clinical trials. And then just really ask your doctor, ask family members, ask different community leaders in your community that are familiar with this kind of research. Like perfect example, Dr. Lopez, sounds like they have such a great network where they are. That's one of the great things that we like about investigators that have community outreach partnerships. So I think that's really big for building trust, providing the transparency, and really just building the network.
Definitely. Amanda, what are some options for folks to learn more about Merck, what Merck is doing in the clinical trial space?
I would say one of the options for understanding what we're doing in the clinical trial space is really to go to merckclinicaltrials.com. On our website, really list out all of our clinical studies that we are conducting. And we also, of course, like every other company, if a clinical trial is being conducted, it has to be on clinicaltrials.gov. So I would say also you go to your HCP, your healthcare provider, have them help go through that site to help locate some as well. In addition, how can you find information about clinical trials? If you're trying to understand, like maybe what some diversity looked like in the trials, there's still the FDA trials snapshot that's available still. So I would say those are some of the ways in which you go about finding out more information about the trials. But you know, I do keep in mind that sometimes it's difficult and it can be overwhelming. So I still recommend that we try to educate as many people as we can so that others can help in the search for clinical trials.
Dr. Farku, Dr. Castellan-Lopez, how does Cedars inform their patients about clinical trials and their resources and options?
Well, we're working on a new strategy to be able to, through the medical, what's called CS Link, which is the medical record, to reach out to patients when they're eligible for studies. And we're working through the mechanics of that. There are some logistical issues about approaching patients, but we have a strategy at Cedars-Sinai of opting out. So we assume that patients want to be approached. They have the option to opt out of learning about clinical trials as they have any encounter with the healthcare system. By having an opt-in system, it opens up the possibility they can learn about clinical trials. And we have a very user-friendly platform to advertise and to promote the clinical trials so that they can, when they get to the clinic, they can approach their doctors and talk about it. So we think that the system of identifying patients for trials on the doctor end and letting the patients beforehand know that they may be eligible for a study are ways in which we can start to build these collaborations and address the misconceptions, as have been pointed out. I think those are major advances for us here at Cedars-Sinai.
And then if I may add a quick shout out to the NIH Community Engagement Alliance, which is SEAL. This is an initiative that was started during COVID, but it has really taken on additional projects and sort of expanded in different directions. And it's an alliance of researchers, community organizations, community leaders that basically focus on addressing disparities and increasing representation in clinical trials. There's a lot of resources, educational resources that are available on that website.
Excellent, excellent. Well, thank you all for joining me for this segment discussing just some of the pervasive myths and misconceptions that have ran through the Black community regarding clinical trials, and just letting us know that clinical trials are indeed safe. You have options. You can opt in and you can opt out whenever you so choose, and that cancer or any other disease that you're dealing with does not have to be the end. You have options. You have really great, amazing, cutting edge treatments that are out there that are just waiting for you. So thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Have a lovely day.
Thank you.
Hello. Oh, Ricky, you're muted.
That was a great panel.
Yes, that was great. And we're about to have another amazing one.
Yeah, we're having a great day here, Taylin. We're rocking it.
We are really rocking it. I mean, this is what Clinical Trials Day is about. It's about education. It's about learning. It's about discussing. It's about just being forthcoming and, sharing all of our concerns and our thoughts. So I'm really glad that we're doing this. And we're about to have an amazing next panel, Spotlight on Success, clinical trials that
Yes.
are making and have made a difference. So to introduce our amazing panelists, I would like to start with Alyssa O'Grady, who's the Vice President of Clinical Research for the Michael J. Fox Foundation for Parkinson's Research. So happy to have you here, Alyssa.
Thanks so much for having me. I'm happy to be here.
Yes. Next, we have Nader Dowd, who is the Associate Director of Clinical Trial Health Equity at Moderna. Thanks for being here, Nader.
An absolute pleasure to be here. Thank you so much, Talon, and the audience.
Of course. And our next guest is Rolando Enoch, who is the Director and Head of Diversity and Inclusion in Clinical Trials at Kite Pharma. We're waiting for him to pop up, but excited to have him on the show as well. So I will start with you, Nader. Can you share a specific example of a clinical trial that has led to significant improvements in the health of Black Americans? I know Moderna has done some amazing work.
Yeah, sure. So I think our work that we're really known for is our Spikevax trial. So our work in the COVID-19 vaccine, and really that was Moderna's first show on the big stage, so to speak, right? It was the first time where we were running this really large phase 3 trial. We were originally founded in 2012, small disease, rare disease company, but our platform worked really well for COVID. And so when we were running the trial, it was really a testament to the company putting its money where its mouth is, so to speak, because we realized around August, September of the year when we were running the trial, 2022, we saw that, or not 2022, 2021, we saw that we had an imbalance in the number of participants of color, and particularly Black Hispanic participants. And in order to correct that, the company realized that we would have to extend the timeline in order to allow to actually encourage people of color to be more enrolled in the trial. And what that meant was working closely with our community partners, with investigators of color, with sites that actually had these populations to go out and say, hey, we really need to enroll people who look like you, people who look like this from this community, because we want to make sure that our vaccine is effective and safe for everyone. And so it took longer for our vaccine to come to market, but we managed to enroll with 38% people of color in the US, which is representative of around 40% people of color that are living in the US across generations. And also representative across sex and age, and also comorbidities. And so a lot of the work that we did there is continued in the work that we do now in our trials, but really was about making sure that we included people equitably from the start, but really to be intentional when we started doing that work, and to really, own in on the problem and then addressing it without, trying to just say, well, we could just end the trial and it'll be what it'll be. We won't be representative, but we'll make it to market, right?
So did you do that? Like, why did Moderna say, okay, we need to try the drug out on Black people? Like, why did you guys have that even motivation? Because it was so commendable and such great thing. Like, what motivated that? Just curious.
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question. Thank you, Ricky. So it was a question of the epidemiology data that was coming out at the time. So we were seeing, I think maybe at the start there was this rumor that was going around, maybe in the news, people heard that like, Black people are more immune to COVID. And that simply was not true, right? There is no biological factor that makes any race more immune or more less susceptible to COVID. It's really just the social determinants of health, the realities of living in houses with comorbidities, and the reality is that we saw that data and we realized there's no way that we could have the enrollment composition look like the way it was going and say that the trial was representative of the people who the disease was affecting most, right? And so in order to reflect that, that's really what led to that impetus of the conversation where the company was like, stop, we can't just continue to move forward at the speed. And there's a really good graphic on the presentations that we share where basically you can see the flip of how composition of enrollment was, mainly white participants, as a lot of clinical trials tend to be. And then this conscious effort was sort of made to say, no, we have to do better, and we have to enroll more people of color, more people who identify as Black, Hispanic, in order to make sure that our trial is representative, and then be able to say that the COVID vaccine that we made as a result of that is effective and safe in all people, not just, the people that we enrolled the most in the trial that were white at the time. So.
Mm-hmm.
Interesting. Great.
Yes. Alyssa, I know that the Michael J. Fox Foundation is working on and has worked on some observational studies. Can you share some of that work?
Absolutely. I'd like to share an example of a success story from the field of Parkinson's genetics within an observational study that the Michael J. Fox Foundation supports. So in 2023, the Global Parkinson's Genetics Program, which is a program supported by the Michael J. Fox Foundation and our partners at the Aligning Science Across Parkinson's Initiative, discovered a new genetic change in people with Parkinson's of African ancestry. People with this genetic change were found to be at a higher risk for developing Parkinson's disease. And this is important because not only do genetic changes give us clues as to what is causing disease, but also the discovery of a new genetic change is often the first step toward developing tailored therapies to target that specific genetic change. So this was a really powerful example of how much more we can learn about disease when we include folks from all communities in research. Prior to the launch of this genetics program that led to this discovery, over 90% of all studies of Parkinson's genetics were focused on people of European ancestry. However, this discovery was made possible because not only did this global consortium put critical dollars toward Parkinson's research in Nigeria, other parts of Africa, and in Black communities within the US, but also because of all of the Black folks who raised their hands to participate in this research.
That's awesome. That's awesome. So we do know that you do know that Parkinson's is genetic, a genetic disease, right? My son-in-law's mother has it. Her father had it. So it's definitely, but they're white. So I was wondering, is that going to how that's going to impact my, multicolored grandchildren, whatever they call it, right? Multi-ethnic grandchildren. But interesting though, because if it is a genetic disease, so you found a different gene in Black people. Is that what you're saying?
That's correct. So Parkinson's is not always genetic, but having a family member who has Parkinson's disease does increase your risk. There are a handful of known genetic mutations that had been discovered largely in white and Ashkenazi Jewish populations, but the genetic change that I mentioned that was discovered in 2023 was a new genetic change that was found basically only in folks of African had mixed ancestry.
That's cool. That's pretty awesome to do that. So can people now test for that genetic mutation?
Not yet, because it is so new and we need to learn more about how to test for the mutation accurately and how to provide counseling back to individuals who might have this genetic mutation, but we are supporting efforts to get us there.
Great. That's phenomenal. That's phenomenal. That's what we want to hear, that clinical trials work, right?
Yes.
What a concept, right? Wow. And I think we're seeing this across other diseases too. So I'm hoping Rolando can make it. But I know we're seeing it across cardiology now with the lipoprene A, blood test that we're now seeing that is now can be a genetic disease for Black people. So all of these things are so important. I would just say, and I would ask you the same question, Alyssa, what sort of got you guys there? Because Black people were having different symptoms, or like what sort of got you to this knowledge?
I think the first step that led to this was this genetics program setting the intentional goal of changing our genetic understanding of Parkinson's disease. So going from the world where 90% of all studies of Parkinson's genetics were focused on individuals of Northern European ancestry, and moving us to a world where that is not the case by supporting worldwide groups with access to folks from all communities. So setting that intention, putting money behind funding research across the globe to make sure that we have significant numbers of people across all communities participating in research. And then from there, also really making sure that all of the sites that were engaging with Black folks were properly resourced, had the trust of the community, and had partnership with MJFF and others to make sure that the study experience was as welcoming as possible.
Nader, what were some of the larger impacts of all the work that you guys did developing Spikevax during COVID?
Yeah. So, I mean, I think the impacts are twofold, right? So there's the impact of having this representation in the trial, and then knowing that as our product goes commercial, you know, that there are people who are Black, people who look like us, people who look like you, who are in the trial, who can speak to that, right? Who can say, hey, you know, I was involved in that trial, and like, it wasn't a bad thing, right? It was good, actually. Like, maybe you even weren't on the placebo and you were getting active drug. And some of those people, you might have heard reports at the time. They were like, oh, you know, like, I feel okay, or like, you know, like I think I got it and it's not as bad. And so the reality is that on one level, it means that what we say at Moderna is that clinical research is the first pillar of healthcare. And people who get involved at this stage, right, the trials of today are the treatments of tomorrow. And so what we really hope to see is that by including people, not just at our phase 3 trials now, and that's the second big impact I would say, is that it's something that's part of the company's philosophy with all the work that we do, is that we think about very intentionally, now that we've, you know, COVID was our first entry into the stage, but now we've run trials across different indications, and not just in infectious disease, but now in oncology as well. And so it's really about making an intentional effort to think about, okay, we did this once, but how do we do it again and again and again? And it's about not copy and pasting in reality. Like, speaking to what Alyssa just mentioned, when we talk about going to these sites, when we talk about going to investigators, when we talk about engaging trusted voices and communities, it's about thinking about it very intentionally from every trial's lens. If we're in a different country, if we're doing it in a different population, different age groups, right? It's different, right? From children to older adults, from America to the UK to we run trials in South America, Africa, and Asia as well. And so when we think about how we recruit equitably in those areas, it's different. And it's different from our experience in COVID, where it was huge, but it was just in the US. And so I think the other impact has really been in the way that our company thinks about running research, in terms of equity being at the forefront of the same way we think about, okay, we want sites that are quality in terms of data, and in terms of, you know, how many participants they get through the door in time, right, to make sure we close out in a timeline, but also how do they engage with their communities, right? Like, do they have site staff that speak the languages of the people around them in the cities that they're in? Do they know about the community centers, or, like, you know, the trusted voices, pastors, barbers, what have you, that people go to, right? And so it's really about being intentional, and I think that that's an impact that we see not just in our department, but also in the way other departments at the company think about it, how we interact with them, and how they know that health equity is a voice at the table that matters.
Definitely.
So
Alyssa,
cool.
sorry, Ricky. Go ahead.
No, go ahead. You go. Go ahead.
No, I was saying, Alyssa, so what are some promising areas in observational studies now that you're working on? Oh, Rolando, you made it.
Rolando, I just came up
Hi.
with you. How are you? Glad you made it.
I'm doing well, thank you. Yes, thank you. You know, Nader, I'm sorry, just to jump in, Nader has just quite poignantly said all these wonderful points that I was just thinking, but I don't think there's nothing else to be added. But to his point, I think that's something that we all are doing. We're being more intentional, and we've recognized that, one, diversity and inclusion, it certainly means something different depending on where you are, the US versus ex-US, the disease population. So I think, that is very key for us to recognize that, and as we're moving forward, to again, improve health equity and ultimately outcomes. So I just wanted to chime in. Nader, you did a fantastic job answering that question.
You did. You really did. It's a great story. Yes. It's a great reality, a real story, a real thing.
And I mean, just to harp on a little more, I mean, the reality that we have 3 people here whose focus is part on health equity in clinical trials, and this entire day with BDO, blackdoctor.org, talking about the importance of it in our communities, it's it's a sign that this work isn't something that should go away, even though you may be hearing otherwise. We can get into that in a bit, but it's important that we are intentional about this and that people aren't just thinking about it as like a, recruitment and diversity, or like, trial optimization and diversity. It's diversity, health equity, inclusion is here to stay, right? And it's a committed effort to do that.
But bottom line is inclusive science is good science. At the end of the day, that's what we're all about. We're all trained scientists governed by data. And so, point blank, period, full stop. So.
Definitely. I know that you joined us a little bit late, Rolando, but can you share an example of just a clinical trial that has been impactful at Kite, especially for the Black community?
Yeah. So, to be completely honest, I mean, Kite, we're kind of, a unicorn in a sense, what we focus on, but, we are oncology, specifically in leukemia and lymphoma, so blood cancers. But, to the things that, again, that Nader mentioned, we're being very intentional now about how we are getting this information out here, how we're talking about potentially life-saving therapies, because at the end of the day, I mean, truthfully, it has been reserved for, and I'm going to step out on a limb and to say one particular population. And so we are being, we're taking what we've witnessed, as we are embarking on this work, that it does take work to do this, but it's not impossible. So I think just letting that lead us as we are embarking on this work, that this is what we have to do. There's no question about it, in spite of what may be going on in the political climate. Again, we were doing these things before FDA said, hey, you all should pull together diversity action plans, which are great, right? I mean, it was great that our health authority kind of put a stake in the ground for us and saying, listen, you need to do this. But even before that, and without that, I mean, again, it just goes back to being very intentional. And so that's what our company, is focused on now, the intentional piece of it all, to get the word out, to get the message out, to be more inclusive of, again, this potentially life-saving and altering therapy.
Well, I was sharing on one of our earlier segments that I would be dead if I didn't have a trial. I had triple negative breast cancer. I did all of the standard of care stuff. I had a mastectomy, and my cancer came back in a year. And my doctor said, okay, you have 2 years to live. We don't have anything for you. And I went and advocated for myself to find a trial, and I took a trial drug. It's now standard of care for triple negative breast cancer, but I would be dead. So not only is it important to do all the right science, but it also can save your life. It saved mine. Yeah. And we have so many examples of breast cancer patients that are experiencing trials. And so this work is so important. But Orlando, one of my best conversations about trial actually, Taylor, was with Dr. Gigi. So Dr. Gigi is one of our, our lovies of blackdoctor.org. And so she was saying how, she worked in AIDS early on, and she worked with Gilead, right? Because if you had AIDS in the early 80s, guess what? The only drug you could take was a clinical trial, right?
Yeah.
That was only that's all you had, or you could die. And so I wish people had that level of, I don't want to say fear, but opportunity to do clinical trials now for any disease, right? Because it's almost like we should think about it not as a last resort, not as something at the end of the road, but as save your life now, as a first thought, right? And so I often tell that story to breast cancer patients, like, if you had AIDS, you would have died if you didn't participate in a trial. And so it's so important.
Yeah, Ricky, to that point, I can't tell you the number of people that, I do get an opportunity to get out in the community as we're doing events, as we're hosting events, but the number of clinical trial patients that have said just that, You
Yeah.
know, had it not been for this clinical trial,
Yeah.
for the opportunity, I wouldn't be standing here today.
Right.
So, and it's so refreshing to see. And I'm gonna go ahead, step out on the limb, Ricky. I think, we've met before. You've seen me in person, and I sometimes just go off the rails with what I'm saying, but and just keeping it
Yeah.
real though, it is so refreshing and fantastic to see Black people saying that. As
Yeah.
I'm out here saying, yes, I participated in the clinical trial. It saved my life, and I would highly recommend it to anyone. To my grandmother, to my niece, to my neighbor. Yes, clinical trials can definitely be beneficial. So, yeah, I mean, I'm happy that you participated and you're here today as a result. But the work continues. We need to continue to get that word out, get the message
Well,
out.
well, our When We Trial campaign, we've been doing it for 3 years, and it's really just women talking about their experiences. We're going to show a video in our next segment about that we one of our patients, but that's how we tell the story, and we've now signed up 26,000 women into our
Mm,
portal.
mm,
So it's really because it's people, they trust us because I'm a bestie, you know what I mean? A voice of trust saying, here's what happened with me. You should do it for your sister, your mom, or your auntie, right?
mhm.
And we have to build it through our community. And that's, to me, our most effective messaging, because that's where the trust comes from other patients. And so, as a patient advocate, that's my God job. But I think,
Mm,
we need all of you guys to tell the stories to do this work. But hopefully more people will feel comfortable. And you know what? People don't do a clinical trial because they want to advance science. They don't understand it.
Right.
They do a clinical trial because they want to see a grandbaby being born. They
Yeah.
want to see another birthday. They want to see their kid graduate from college, as they did this weekend at Morehouse. So they want to see all these things, and they want to live. And so I think that we have to bring love to this conversation and how we talk about it. It's about
Right. That's not to say that some clinical trials, that do work to advance just knowledge alone and may not, ultimately be you receiving a treatment. Like, say, for instance, an observational study, which is why I wanted to bring Alyssa on, was to talk about how even observational studies can be super, super, can be great contributors to this science and to the longevity of Black folks in general.
Yeah.
So, Alyssa, can you share what your team is working on now?
Yes, and let me first say that to get to better treatments and a cure for Parkinson's for all, we know that the diversity within the clinical trials that we're supporting must match the diversity that we see in the real world Parkinson's community. So to that end, joining a research study is a great way to make an impact today, whether you have Parkinson's disease, whether you have a loved one with Parkinson's disease, or if you just care about learning more about brain health and aging. So I'm excited to share 2 different research opportunities available through the Michael J. Fox Foundation that you could sign up for today. The first one is called the Parkinson's Progression Markers Initiative, or PPMI for short. This is the Michael J. Fox Foundation's landmark study that's gathering information from people of all backgrounds with and without Parkinson's over time to help us learn more about how brain disease starts, how it changes, and how to stop it. There are many different ways to get involved and get started with PPMI. Anyone, whether you have Parkinson's or not, can join by taking online surveys. It's simple to do and can be done from the comfort of your own home. If you are over the age of 40 without Parkinson's disease or living with Parkinson's and diagnosed within the last 7 years, your starting point can be as simple as taking a scratch and sniff smell test in the mail. You can learn more and join at michaeljfox.org/get started, or if you prefer a phone number, you can call 877-525-PPMI. The second research participation opportunity we have is called the Black and African American Connections to Parkinson's Disease Study, or BLACK-PD for short. This is a one-time clinical visit that aims to learn more about genetic changes that may cause Parkinson's in Black and African American folks. Data from this study were part of what led to the genetic discovery that I mentioned earlier. So it's an incredibly important research participation opportunity. You can visit blackpd.org, that's BLAACPD.org, to find a site near you.
Great.
Awesome.
Nader, can you share anything that Moderna is working on?
Yeah, I want to hear a little bit more about that scratch and sniff test, honestly.
Oh, I'm definitely.
That sounds really cool.
Right? That does sound really cool. But
to,
I'm
to being in the cinema with a scratch and sniff.
yeah, it took me right back to middle school. But so I can share that, you know, we are known as the COVID company, and we also have RSV now on the market as well. But some of the really interesting work that we're doing, I'll highlight, is one is in CMV, or cytomegalovirus. And so this is one of the leading causes of neurosensory hearing loss in infants who are born with congenital CMV. So if you're a mom who gets it while you're pregnant, it can be passed on to the infant, and then your infant, 1 in 5 are born without the ability to hear. And so this affects Black and brown mothers at almost 2 times the rate that it does, and Black and brown infants at almost 2 times the rate that it does white infants in the US. And so one of our focuses in this trial has really been to make sure that we have reflected the diversity again of the disease burden in the US. And we're now moving towards the end of our phase 3. And so a lot of the work there, again, is really it's really interesting from the perspective, or really important from the perspective of the fact that it's not really something people know about until it affects them. And so we've done a lot of really good work in terms of going out in communities and having, like, you know, even a TikTok campaign where we sort of just talked to people on the street and said, like, you know, do you know what CMV is, right? Like, do you know what it stands for? Have you heard of it, right? And it's interesting because, you know, it has such a large impact, but it's not something that has as much awareness. And even OBs, my wife is an OB-GYN, don't always really think about it in the sense of how it can affect children, right, in the future of pediatrics. And so that's one study and one line of work that I think is really interesting and really key to our communities. And the other line is really our oncology work. And it's really been interesting in terms of how it works. Our INT program, or individualized neoantigen therapy, which basically means we take a sample from our patients who have a tumor and then build a treatment for them that is personalized to that, or individualized to that particular tumor biopsy. And so our work in combination with Merck, so that's partnered with Merck, is really key, again, because when we think about things like melanoma and other cancer areas that we're expanding to, historically, melanoma has been seen more as a white disease in the US in particular, but that's really because of underdiagnosis that we notice. Exactly, because Black skin color. Whenever we talk about dermatology in the Black community, we know that, you know, historically examples and treatments are not based on the color of our skin, and that's a lot of the diagnosis and treatment for skin, at least. So a lot of the work there, I think, is really, really poignant and really important, and we're trying to be as inclusive as we have been for our infectious disease trials. But again, thinking about it differently, because it's cancer. And it's not just healthy volunteers necessarily. We're looking at people who have diseases, right, and are looking to better ideally treat their disease, or maybe it's the only option that they have, as Ricky mentioned. And so it's a different approach, but also really important. And what I can share, because there are too many trials for me to go through them, is that if you go to trials.modernatx.com, you can see an entire listing of all of Moderna's trials. And it's kind of like clinicaltrials.gov, but just specific to the trials at Moderna. And you can join our Moderna community, which is linked within that trial homepage, that basically allows you to register and sign up for, if you have any indications that you're interested in. We will basically reach out if, you know, there is a trial down the line that you might be eligible for, and it tries to make the information more digestible and a little bit more friendly than the clinicaltrials.gov, which has gotten better. I'm not hitting on that, but.
I think clinicaltrials.gov is like going to hell blindfolded. So my
is it not already there though? I thought it was already there.
I know, right? It's already there. We have a breast cancer portal on our When We trial site, because it just puts a hug around it. So, because it's so hard to manipulate for patients, but we also just help people. You know, you can always email me if you're looking for a breast cancer trial.
Of course.
Or a prostate trial.
Great. Well, thank you all so much for joining. This has been an amazing chat. I am actually so much more excited to just learn how I can participate. That scratch and sniff test,
I know.
I have to get in on that. I mean,
I'll do it.
I might be young to think about Parkinson's, but at the end of the day, no, it's still important to look at all ages for that. So that's great. That's great, Alyssa. Thank you.
We have to build awareness of all of this stuff, though. We just have to keep talking about it and talking about it and talking about it.
Yep.
Absolutely.
The average person just doesn't know. And why would they? Right?
Right.
Right.
And that's why we do the work that we do. So thank you all so much for joining.
Thank you so much for joining us.
Happy Clinical Trials Day.
Happy Clinical Trials Day. One of my favorite days of the year. Bye. Take
Bye.
care.
Wow, Ricky. I can't believe we've made it this far.
I know. Gosh, it went so fast. It's 2:00 already.
Yes,
So do
it's
we have,
just been a
yeah,
marathon.
we're into the wire, but we have my favorite panels coming.
Yes.
I mean, not that I know all of our friends, but you know, these are my girls.
I know the patient experience. I've been so excited about this segment as well. I just can't wait to hear from the folks who have been actively involved and just learn how clinical trials have ultimately saved and or changed their lives. So I'm happy to bring on Karen, LaToya, and Tony.
Yeah. Hey. Hey,
Hello,
friend.
everyone. Hi.
Hey.
Hi, everybody.
Yes. Yeah.
Hey, LaToya. Hey, haven't seen you in a minute. How are you?
Karen, I've been missing you, girl.
Yeah. Been lifing and adulting.
I hear you. And Tony, meet our new friend Tony. I brought him into our Breasty family, you guys. So
nice to meet you, Tony.
Pleasure to be here. Thank you.
Yes. So introduce our amazing panelist, Karen Peterson. She is a triple negative breast cancer patient advocate. LaToya Bolts Johnson, who's also a triple negative breast cancer patient advocate, as well as a healthcare provider. And Dr. Tony Lizama, who is a medical director at Novartis. So happy to have the three of you here.
Happy to be here. Thank you.
Happy to be here.
Good.
Yes. And of course, Ricky, just you're everything that you've done to just bring the Black breast cancer experience to the forefront. I'm just so excited for you to share your journey as well in all of this. So I guess, So I guess to start, let's start with Karen. How did you first discover your very first clinical trial?
Well, I've only been on one trial, but before I even discuss it, thanks. Happy Clinical Trials Day, and thanks to BlackDoctors.org and Touch PDCA for having me. How did I find my trial? It's a long, arduous story. It had a lot to do with self-education, self-advocacy, and being able to make a decision under a really pressurized environment. I suddenly realized that standard of care was not going to work for me after being diagnosed with stage 4, and realized I had to do something very, very quickly. And in 2017, of course, at the time, there was no FDA-approved treatment option for triple negative other than standard of care. So I call it the wild, wild west. Everything was sort of wide open, and you sort of had to sort of figure things out on your own, because there wasn't a lot of, how can I say, patient navigation and anyone I could talk to who had clinical trial experience who I could really trust. So I actually had to build my own plan. I had to make a promise to myself, and the promise was to not make any emotional decisions and make sure that everything that I was doing was meticulous, and make sure that everything I was doing was going to be an informed decision and ultimately save my life. So I went through a lot of wild scenarios, sneaking into labs, talking my way past guards, approaching researchers at, how could I say this? they'd be out talking in the community. So sometimes I'd go to their lab. Sometimes if they were out doing professional work, I'd speak to them. I'd saddle them up at the bar and have a drink with them and really, approach them and just peg, try and figure out like, hey, what kind of information can you give me that would be valuable? Eventually, I was able to get an appointment at a doctor's office, and she was the one. Her name is Dr. Linda Badat, who really broke down how you make an informed decision. And in order to move forward, I had to have certain diagnostic tests. I had to have access to that. And it was really, really important. And that's what I mean about being meticulous, especially with triple negative, because again, everybody is so different. It's like heterogeneity should be a dinner guest at your table as soon as you've been diagnosed. It's really, really important because all of us are different. Everybody should know their subset. And after having that conversation with her, it really opened up the world of options for me. Once I got that genomic report back, it was like money in the bank. I could take this report and I could now take it to a researcher who could quantify why I might be right for a particular trial. Because it's not always about a trial. For me, it was about the right trial. I had a 4% chance of survival. I was dying at the time. And I approached the doctor, and he looked at my genomic report and he thought, hey, I've got a winner here. And it was history after that. And the trial drugs that saved my life had nothing to do with breast cancer, nothing to do with breast cancer at all. And so this day, that's one of the, assumptions that people make that, oh, Karen, yeah, I know you were on the forefront of getting breast cancer drugs approved. And it was like, no, unfortunately not. But I still participated in the clinical trial. And I still feel like my experience as a breast cancer survivor is valuable in the sense of making sure that people understand everybody is different. Get involved with clinical research. It is a tool. It is an option. And again, I was very lucky. I got really, really lucky.
Right.
You
Latoya,
are
same
blessed. You are
question.
blessed. You are
Can you
blessed.
repeat? Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. Latoya, same question for you. How did you discover your trial?
So I discovered my trial on my own. I was diagnosed with stage 3C triple negative breast cancer at age 36 with 3 little babies who were under the age of 6 years old at that time after I had recently stopped nursing. And well, I'm gonna take that back. I didn't discover the exact trial that I was in on my own, but I was pushing for trials on my own from the very beginning. I understood the importance of clinical research as a PA, and I was dismissed a lot by my oncologist, whom I fired, who did not offer immunotherapy to me. And so after I fired him, I met with another medical oncologist who was progressive, had just finished a fellowship. And I told her from the very beginning, I need to be a part of a clinical trial. I've researched some. I was sending emails to my oncologist at that time of different NCT studies of trials that I had found on my own. And he was just very dismissive about it. And when I went to the second oncologist, she was like, okay, I think there's a trial, at a nearby university where I just completed my fellowship, and I'll reach out to them. And I was in the trial within 2 weeks. But it was, it wasn't that easy because there was several months that had passed before someone actually listened to me to be a part of a trial. And how that enveloped into the advocacy space is because I realized how difficult it was for me to navigate that as a healthcare professional myself. So I was thinking to myself, my God, like this has to be incredibly more difficult for the general population, or that the general population don't even know to ask for these trials, because the stats show that we're not even offered these trials.
Right.
So you have a Black woman who's asking for the trials, who understands the importance of the trials. You don't have to persuade me to be a part of the trial. I'm asking for it, and you still won't listen to me.
Right.
So I realized that I had to be a voice for other women who look like me to know the importance of the clinical research. And I was so desperate to be part of a trial because I was so advanced. But also, more importantly, I did it for my 3 daughters who will develop breast one day. And if we can get one step closer to formulating a cure or developing the latest treatment methods for triple negative breast cancer, then that may help my children along the way. This was very important for me in building my own medical trust fund for my children. That was so important.
Say that again. You're building what?
I was building my own medical trust fund for my children.
Yes, medical trust fund. I love that. I love that.
We love that.
Ricky, yeah, Ricky, I've been looking forward to hearing your story all day. How did you
I've
discover?
been telling my story all day, right? I tell it.
Yeah,
but, you know, it really is. You know, my doctor gave me 2 years to live. I did all this diet triple negative too. And we love our blesties, but we have a special place in our heart for triple negative because, you know, we're the only breast cancer subtype that does not have a drug to prevent recurrence. And so every other drug you can take, Tamoxifen, you can take all these drugs to prevent it from coming back. We don't have that. So I think we're special. We also, even now, only have 2 targeted therapies after all these years, and they've only been around for the last couple of years. Karen didn't have access to anything. I didn't. LaToya came at the very beginning of this, one of the therapies. And so we don't have a drug. And Black women get triple negative breast cancer at 3 times the rate of white women. And we now know that our cells look different. I was in London a month ago or so, and I looked in the microscope at Guy's Cancer Center, and I could see what a Black TNBC cell looks like versus a white one. They look nothing alike. Also, the immune cells for a Black person versus a white person look nothing alike. So not only is our cancer different, but how it's interacting with both medication and with our own immune systems, and the immune systems with the medication is totally different. And so until we do clinical trials, we're not going to get the drugs that we need for our disease. 40% of triple negative breast cancer is women under 40. That's crazy, right? And we're seeing these young women get it like LaToya and even younger than LaToya. And it's horrible. And they're dying because the drugs aren't working. So if we don't do more clinical trials for any breast cancer, but especially triple negative, you know, we're going to keep dying. And, you know, we're actually right now recruiting for 4 trials for TNBC. And there's more TNBC research happening now than I've ever seen since I've been in this work. And so there's such an opportunity. So if you have TNBC, you can take and do an early stage trial, a metastatic trial. They're all out there. So please email me if you want to do that. But I mean, I did a double mastectomy. I did 6 rounds of the standard of care chemo. I did 6 weeks of radiation. I did all the standard of care stuff. I was told I had no evidence of disease. Come back in 2 months for a scan. I came back 2 months later. They said, okay, we have nothing for you. You have 5 spots on your test wall. You're going to, you know, you have 2 years. Work it out. And I said, well, I can't really die right now. I have a daughter at Dartmouth. I got to pay tuition. So I went and advocated for myself. And I found the Triple Negative Breast Cancer Foundation, and my dear friend, all of us love her, Haley Dinnerman. And she said, I'm going to find you a doctor. And there were about 5 docs at the time who were researching TNBC. And this one happened to be researching TNBC with Black women at Emory, Ruth O'Regan. And she put me on 2 drugs that were experimental, carboplatin and gemcitabine. They are now standard of care for TNBC, but I took them as experimental drugs and I didn't die. And it's been 13 years. And so this is my God job. And this is why I have my Blesty sisters and we all do this work. And I've made videos about both of their stories because we know that by telling our stories, we can engage women, right? And they're hearing us. And so our campaign that, you know, both of these guys have participated in, we've now signed up 26,135 Black women for our clinical trial portal. So we figured out how to talk about it because doctors aren't asking us. We know that. And we have to convince people and just explain it in words people can spell. Like, you know, that Advil you took last week, it was in a clinical trial. You know, that heart medicine I gave my sleeping dog Harper, sleeping right next to me on my feet, was in a clinical trial. There is no sugar pill. And you know, even to young women, I explain, you know, you could get the iPhone 15 or the iPhone 16. What if you could get the iPhone 20 for your cancer or for your disease? Because, you know, it's something like Karen said, it was totally experimental, not even for breast cancer. But she found a drug that was never even put on breast cancer, but it was something that saved her life. So it saved my life. You know, I think it saved all of our lives. And so I think that it's something that we just have to normalize and make people understand that it should be just part of your original treatment plan. When you get sick, you know, a trial should be one of the options you consider. And now we have so many to try, and you know, we'll help you find them. But I think, you know, we're talking breast cancer. Tony, talk to us about heart disease, because I think there's like, you have this whole new understanding with Lp(a), right? Which is like, why didn't we know this already? And I think that and we're seeing this in cardiology, but really every disease area, we see our Black people are different.
Oh, you bring up a great point, Ricky. And so, as well as you, Latoya and Karen, thank you for sharing your stories. Thank you to BDO for hosting this, and Taylor, of course, to you. With that being said, one of the things that I try to do on a daily basis is remove all of the hoops, hurdles, and barriers that you guys faced trying to get into studies. And one of the reasons why is because there's just a lack of education and a lack of awareness.
Yeah.
And so we don't know about studies, and you know, that's both on the patient side and as well as provider side. You have a lot of providers out there that are actually interested in clinical trials, but they themselves don't know how to get involved with the clinical trials. And so we try to smooth out that process as well for them, and then address some of the key issues that some of these folks may have. A patient may not think that they're eligible for a clinical trial when they really are. A provider, they might not think that the patient sitting in front of them is the right fit for a clinical trial, but that they are. And one of the favorite stories that I like to share is that I was sitting with a provider one time, and they just assumed that African American woman that was older on paper had everything that they needed to be part of a study, but didn't think that they'd be able to really commit to the study because they just had the assumption that they don't have transportation. They probably are going to have to end up watching their grandkids or something like this. And I asked a very simple question of, well, the Caucasian woman that was just in here before that also fit that profile, did you think the same way of them? And the physician had to check themselves and realize, okay, you know, I didn't. And so there's lots of hoops and hurdles and barriers that we have to overcome in that regard, in particular when it comes to our community, the African American community. Ricky, you mentioned the Lp(a), and so that's my area of interest and expertise. And for those that are watching that don't know, Lp(a) or elevated Lp(a) is a cardiovascular risk driver. And if you have increased levels of this, you are at higher risk to develop peripheral arterial disease or have a heart attack, a stroke, or what have you. It's very common. It's actually one of the most common genetic dyslipidemias around, and 1 in 5 people in the entire world have it. So it's actually more common than diabetes. But what really drives home for us is that African Americans are actually more likely to have it, and they're more likely to have higher levels. However, people don't get tested, and African Americans are even less likely to be screened and tested because this is not something that's standard for normal lipid panels. So it's really important for us to know about this and to advocate to get screened and tested for it, so that we know about it and that our families can know, because it is genetic. So if you have it, there's a good chance that your cousin, your uncle, your aunt, your mom, whoever may have it as well. Now, once you know that you have it, there's some good news, because my organization, as well as other great companies, actually are studying Lp(a) and have medicines within the pipeline right now to address this condition, to try to lower that. And so if we don't know about these studies and we don't know about Lp(a), it's going to be very difficult for us to make progress, in particular for African Americans, because traditionally, to be very honest, cardiovascular disease studies have been 85-90% white men. And Ricky, you nailed it. Black people in many disease states are different. And Lp(a) may be that situation as well. We don't know yet, but we do know that we have different levels, and we're more likely to have elevated Lp(a) than other people. So it's going to be critical for us to be a part of those studies and to be a part of those conversations going forward. And so I pride myself in trying to raise that awareness and advocate both for providers and for patients for the information that they may not have known about, have had access to, so that we can have the conversation going and get more involvement within these studies that are so critical to our community.
Yeah, Tony, I was wondering, you know, as you were listening to these women's stories, like, and you being a doctor and all, like, what was coming up for you, knowing that doctors were at first kind of skating past the issue of clinical trials and, you know, not being so forthcoming about it?
So I think oftentimes, you know, folks are so bogged down in the office that they're trying to get through the day-to-day and provide the best care that they can. And trials for many folks hasn't been part of their day-to-day. The overwhelming majority of doctors are not part of clinical trials. And the ones that are part of clinical trials, I think a lot of them do a good job of making folks aware, but we can always do better. We can always do better. And so I think we need to strive to do better. I think one key element in particular that I've been focused on for our community is helping folks that serve these communities, that serve African Americans, Hispanics, South Asians, just the underrepresented, helping them get involved with clinical research themselves. I think it's and we have good data to show this. The ABC has done a great job of demonstrating this, that if you are an African American physician, you have a better chance of getting an African American patient involved in a clinical trial. You are more likely to treat an African American patient. So making sure that our researchers, whether it be at one company or another, is truly reflective of the population that they serve, I think will go a long way in making sure that we have that representation. And I can say that there's been concerted efforts within that space to make sure that it's not 2%, 3%, 5% representation from an investigator standpoint, but getting close to what it really is in the United States, which is more like a third. It's so that way we can capture patients that are more representative of what the country looks like. So instead of, in breast cancer is a great example, same thing with cardiovascular, instead of 5% or 10% African American or 5% or 10% Hispanic, it's looking more like 20%. And sometimes you have an overrepresentation, which would be great, 40%. That's really what is needed here. And so I think, again, it's going to take all of us talking to each other, working with each other to make sure that no one gets overlooked and that people have the opportunity to participate within these clinical trials, which is so critical to moving the field forward, regardless of the therapeutic area, and then really for our own benefit and health, so that Latoya can see her 3 babies grow up, so that Ricky can finish paying tuition, and and so that Karen can live a long, healthy life and see all of her ancestors and what have you live long, healthy lives as well.
Yes.
And it's about love. I said this earlier too. Patients don't want to do a clinical trial to advance science. They don't understand it. And if you picked up at the phone right now and called anybody you know and said, "How does a clinical trial work?" they wouldn't be able to tell you, right? Why would you know? And I think people find out about them when they're in a crisis, when we're fighting for our lives, right? Or we're fighting for our families' lives. And so we need to understand this whole have this understanding of science well before somebody needs something, right? And it's really about me watching watching Haley walk across the Dartmouth stage. It's about Latoya, watching her 10-year-old have a birthday party. It's about Karen, just being with her nieces and nephews who she adores, and just having the love of our, it's about love. It's about being able to have a life. And, people always say, we're going to give you good quality of life. What the hell does that mean, right? Yeah. We want to live our lives. And so we need the science. We
have to normalize those conversations and break down the stigma associated with it, that it's like taboo or it's something poisonous to, the Black population. And I know there's like a lot of mistrust behind that because of historical medical experimentation that has been done to Black people. But like you said, Ricky, if it's related to them in those plain language terms, and you see that, okay, I went through it, I'm alive, and I received the standard of care plus the VIP treatment, so to speak. And that this helps, it helps you, it helps your offspring, it helps your family, it helps your neighbor. I think that's where it has to be too, because I know I have personally tried to enroll other people in clinical trials, and they're like, well, I'm not that sick, or I don't need it, or it's not that bad, or whatever. And you don't have to be a part of a clinical trial, just in a more of like end of life stage. You don't look at it. It's not just that, it's not just for that, is what I want to relate to the population.
Yeah. And that's why I put together this summit, is because I'm a young Black woman in my 30s. A chronic illness runs in my family. Thankfully, it has not directly impacted me yet, but when the time comes, I know that I have been armed with the knowledge. I can arm other people with the knowledge that there are options out there. You don't have to be super sick. I could even participate in an observational trial right now, beta thalassemia, which is part of sickle cell that runs in my family. I could participate in an observational trial. I could work to get my relatives involved in a trial that could ultimately cure their disease. But because of these conversations that they haven't been present for, they're like, oh well, what if they treat me like a guinea pig? What if they treat me like this? And I'm like, no, you're gonna be getting the VIP treatment. There's so many options. So I'm so glad that we're having this conversation today. But
when you hear the topic, Taylor, you get better care. You get better. There's more people prodding you and picking on you and scanning you. And if you just went on chemo today for breast cancer, you probably wouldn't have a scan for 3 months. But if you're in a trial, you're going to get scanned every month because they want to know if it's working, and they can change it up. And you can always drop out or change your meds. You have flexibility to get the best care you can. So that's what's out there for us. The other thing we didn't touch on, I want to bring up too a little bit, is that a lot of the clinical trials are for phase 3 trials. And I think one of our earlier sessions, Dr. Keith explained the different phases.
Yes.
And by phase 3, phase 1 is for safety, phase 2 is for dosage. Phase 3 is when we test against the standard of care drug. But we need to get Black people all the way into phase 1 because we need
I'm a phase 1 survivor. I am a phase 1 survivor.
Phase 1 survivor. Say that,
Karen. Yeah, I'm a phase 1 survivor. So I was very particular about it. I can remember before I fired my original team, them throwing out the idea after they found out that I was having conversations, really good conversations, transparent conversations with other, medical providers. Suddenly my voice became valuable. And they was like, hey, what about a phase 3? And I'm like, at the time, and again, we're all different. I was diagnosed with stage 4 metastatic triple negative breast cancer. There was nothing else in the market. There was nothing else that was going to help me. Why? And I had to be able to survive. So I needed to be guaranteed the drug. Phase 1, you are guaranteed the drug. By the time you get to phase 3, they're working things out. They're offering you the standard of care versus the experimental drug. But in phase 1, you're guaranteed to get the drug. How did I know that I was going to be able to survive 24 weeks or 12 weeks in a phase 3 trial? Why would you even have that conversation with me? You're sitting here in front of me and we're discussing my life. You can clearly see that, it's not going well at this time. And, I thought that it was the best alternative is to strictly go with phase 1 because I was going to be guaranteed to go through the safety protocols and, the efficacy, I'm going to say watchdogs that were there to make sure that everything with me was going to be all right. But most of all, it was a selfish reason. I knew I was going to be guaranteed the drug. So, again, to everyone's point here, it's really about education and making sure that when people engage with, medical providers, I think it's about making sure education is put on of these conversations, like what is phase 1, what is phase 2, what is phase 3, all of the responsibilities, everything that comes across, even the hypotheses of the drug itself was explained to me. These are simple, but really hard terms to really come to grips with if you're a person trying to make a decision under a pressurized environment. But it becomes a lot easier if the information is given to you at the very beginning. I'm an advocate for education too, from the top.
Excellent. I know that we're coming up on time, but I want to ask each one of you, if you meet someone who's saying that they're hesitant about doing a clinical trial for their condition, what words of advice would you give them? I'll start with you, LaToya.
Just do it. Just do it. Don't be afraid. Just make sure you understand the ABCs of the trial and you understand, in going through the informed consent and everything, but don't be scared. I mean, you're going to get the standard of care of medicine. You're going to get whatever is the latest and greatest medication that's available for your disease. You're going to get VIP medical treatment as I see it, because you have, you're getting labs on a regular basis, as you should in the standard chemo treatment. I'm not saying that you're not, but most of the time you're at a stellar academic institution where you have plenty of medical staff and fellows and nurses, and you have all these people examining you, and so I just feel as though you shouldn't have any hesitation to do it, because you're going to get whatever is you're going to get the most modern standard of care for your disease.
You're going to get the best science.
Yeah.
Karen?
This is a very sticky question, so I'm just going to go with what I tell most patients when they ask me, or because they're resistant about, well, whether I should go see the research team. I say go, because you don't know what's going to come out of that conversation. Sometimes having, again, access to diagnostic tools may open up a lane for you that, oh, you have a mutation. You might not need the trial. You might be able to go to an FDA-approved drug that you didn't even know about. But you wouldn't know this unless you had a conversation with the researcher who can break these things down to you. So again, I feel like everyone should be able to have the conversation, because I look at clinical trials as a tool. I don't look at it as experimental. For me, it's a tool, and I feel like, again, the conversation about clinical research, how many times are you going to have a top-rated researcher who may be one of the best in the world? How many times are you going to be able to have 20, 25 minutes, an hour 45 with this person? How many times in your lifetime and through your medical journey are you going to have the ability to be able to do that? Take advantage of it. You don't know where it leads, so keep your options open.
Definitely. Tony?
I agree wholeheartedly to keep an open mind. It's okay to be afraid. It's 100% normal and okay to be afraid and be scared. But to Karen's point, speak to your physician or speak to a physician that you know or has found out that are involved with clinical trials, because many of those physicians are, as Karen was eloquently putting, the best in the world. And most times they don't have a significant amount of time to sit down and chat. But when it comes to research, you may be sitting across from the best oncologist, the best cardiologist in America for an hour, talking about the study and walking through with you. So just have that conversation. And if a physician doesn't want to have the conversation with you, maybe reach out to folks that do want to have that conversation. And then last but not least, talk to the people that love you. Talk to your family, talk to your kids, and explain to them what a trial may mean and what it may mean being a part of one and what it may mean not being part of one. And after speaking with those that are in the know and those that want to see you grow, I think it's going to be very easy for you to make a decision.
And last but not least, Ricky.
I would say, call me. But you know what? I would say speak to an advocacy group. We have many breast cancer groups. We have many, the Black Heart Association. Speak to some advocates like me and, like us, like me and Karen and Toya and Tony, and we can give you our stories, because I think it's our stories that we're here. We're living testimonies of God's work and miracles that can happen, or that can happen through science. And so I think when you start to say, okay, what are all the things I need to be up against that I'm up against, and you learn look at all the information, it comes down to hearing a story from somebody you can trust. And so we'll talk about it. We'll tell you, and we'll share other stories. And we have lots of friends we can put in front of you to talk. But call an advocacy group. Call somebody that where you can talk to a patient that went through the experience, had a lived experience with you. But it's the best science we have.
Truly, truly. Well, thank you all so much for joining us on this segment. It was really wonderful hearing all of your stories. I feel empowered. I hope all of our viewers feel empowered. We should all have learned so much. And yeah, how can we reach all of you? Karen?
You can find me at www.karensclub.org.
Latoya, how can we reach you? Oh, is she paused?
It looks like she's paused. You can reach her through me. But go ahead.
Okay.
Please, Anthony Lozama at LinkedIn, please feel free to reach out. I'm happy to have further conversations. So again, Anthony Lozama at LinkedIn.
Great. Well, thank you all so much, and have a wonderful Clinical Trials Day.
Thank you.
Happy Clinical Trials Day.
Happy Clinical Trials Day, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. I am a stage 4 triple negative breast cancer survivor. I was one of the first people in the nation to join the trial that I did. To be able to participate in that was huge. It saved my life. The drug hasn't reached the market yet, but I'm alive. Without participating, we don't know the true efficacy. We have to participate. Research is moving forward. We don't want to be left behind.
Wow.
Wow, what a day.
What a day. We did it.
I did not know Karen was a phase 1. I've known her for 5 years. I'm going to call her.
Yeah, that's news to me. That's incredible. We don't hear too many stories like that.
No, we need to put that in the video. So, but wow, what a day. We had such great talks.
Yeah, we learned so much about what a clinical trial even is, the phases of it. We just addressed so many questions, concerns, conceptions, myths. I feel way more armed to talk about clinical trials with my loved ones. I hope everyone else watching this feels the same.
So.
Yes. But thank you, Ricky. Thank you so much for just helping to put this together. This was amazing. We have to do this every year.
Every year. It's our clinical trials party every year. We're going to do it every year, Kaylin, and get more people to talk. And the more stories we can share, I think the more confident people will feel about it. And we hope you share it with your families. Don't wait till somebody's sick.
Yes.
Don't wait till something where you're in a crisis and you have to make a decision fast. Think about it, and think about all the non-drug trials. I've done 7 trials. I've done this thing where you wear a bracelet around your armrest and it measures the impact of the chemicals you put in your body. There's all kinds of trials. I go to Georgetown and live, I live in Maryland, and they have a whole trial thing. And I have my friend Jennifer that calls me up when she's doing something. So plug into your local hospital, plug into a local teaching hospital, and do a trial for anything. There's all kinds of stuff happening. We just need more science for Black people.
Yes, I actually just signed up for a skincare trial. So there's so many options. I mean, going back to even a scratch and sniff test, I've never even heard of that.
I want to do that. I would know, but it's this, science is amazing. And I am a marketing person. I do not have a science math brain, but I'm around all these scientists now, and I watch these people just study, and there's so many people doing hard work. And so participate in it, get to know it, and be comfortable with, it's really life we're talking about here.
It really is. It really is. I mean, I love science, even though I'm simply a science journalist. This is my bread and butter. So I just love hearing about good data and good science and good research. That is what matters to me, and showing that Black folks do not have to be, bystanders to this. We can participate.
We have to be left out. We don't have to be left out.
Yes.
We should be all in it. All in it. All in it.
100%. 100%. Great.
So guys, what are you gonna do next, girl? We gotta.
My brain is huge. I've taken way too many notes. I feel like I have to download all of this.
I know. Let's write an article. Let's talk about it more. And we're gonna do. Doctor is in tomorrow. We're gonna do clinical trials. Talk about clinical trials. We have 3 awesome docs coming on, and we're gonna keep up this conversation. Well, I talk about all the time, but we gotta make people know. So.
Right.
Yeah.
Yes, definitely. And reminder, I'm an editor of the Clinical Trials Resource Center at blackdoctor.org. I'll be sure to drop a link to our Clinical Trials Resource Center in the comments. There you can discover clinical trials for nearly any condition that you're interested in, whether it's breast cancer, lupus, eczema, even mental health. There are amazing trials out there that are invasive to non-invasive. Anything you need to know, we update the Clinical Trials Resource Center daily with new trials, new research, new data, and interviews with people who have either participated in trials or are running them. So you will never be unarmed with this information.
Great. And our whenwetrial.org, we have the same thing. on trials. Our blacktmbcsanctuary.org, we have triple negative stuff, but we have a portal on our site, so you don't have to go to that horrible place that gives you takes you through it. And we're also here, and Dr. Keith, we had him on earlier. That's what we do all day, is find trials for people. So Ricky at touchbbca.org. You can find me, and we're here, and we'll keep it up. Taylor, keep doing the work.
And if you have questions about any type of clinical trial that is even beyond breast cancer, feel free to reach me at taylin@blackdoctor.org. So thank you, Ricky. You have a wonderful Trials Day. Talk to you soon.
Bless you, love. Talk to you soon. Bye.